and welcome to It's a Fandom Thing. We are talking about one of my favorite shows, 6 Feet Under. And I'm so happy because Carla is here. And this is the first time Carla has ever watched this show. So I know some of her reactions, but I don't know all of them. So I am really excited to talk about this show with Carla. And this was rewatching this was the first time really that I had watched the whole thing since it had aired. So that was quite an experience. Yes, there are some things that you gotta go cringe at, but that's to be expected for a show that ran from 2001 to 2005. It's sadly expected that there will be some things you kind of cringe at, but I still love this show a lot. I really, really love this show. It's a very emotional roller coaster, especially we were just discussing before we started the last episodes from 9 until the series finale. The series finale for this show, by the way, and I'll just say this really quickly we're going to talk about it, of course, is one of the most beloved series finales of any. And when Dexter ended, which also starred Michael C. Hall, of course, everyone said, poor Michael C. Hall. He was in one of the greatest series finales ever. And then before they made up for it, and then he was in the worst series finale.
Talk about like living through extremes.
I know. Yeah. So like I've been starting a lot of these, and of course we're going to get to trigger warnings before we get into the real discussion, because basically I could say trigger warning for anything in this show, but I just want to list some big ones, some major ones. But the plot, this is a synopsis from IMDb. So remember, this is going to be very simple. It's like a tagline. A chronicle of lives of a dysfunctional family who run an independent funeral home in Los Angeles. So yes, very simplistic because it is about a lot more than that. 6 Feet Under was created by Alan Ball. This was the first time he'd ever directed anything as well. So when he directed the pilot, and of course, there's been many other directors, like notably Kathy Bates directed some episodes in the first season, and then she came on as a really amazing, awesome, one of my favorite characters on the show, Bettina. She came on in season 3. But Kathy Bates is an amazing director, an amazing actress, and I'm sure we'll rave about her. I'm considering her an honorable Fisher member. So when we go to that family, I will include her in there. But it stars Peter Krauser as Nate Fisher, Michael C. Hall as David Fisher, Frances Conroy as Ruth Fisher. I don't have to keep saying the last names, I don't think, but Lauren Ambrose as Claire Fisher. Since I already did it, I'm going to do it.
You can mess up now.
I know. Richard Jenkins as Nathaniel Fisher, who of course dies in the very first episode. That's the very first opening death you see in the series, because of course the series opens with deaths every single episode, except for the finale. It does not open with a death. It opens with a birth. And then Freddie Rodriguez as Rico Diaz, or Federico Diaz. This role was written specifically for this actor, by the way. Alan Ball created it specifically for him. Matthew St. Patrick as Keith Charles, Rachel Griffiths as Brenda Chenoweth, Justina Mikado as Vanessa Diaz, Jeremy Sisto, who used to follow me on Twitter and one day decided to stop following me. And broke my little heart.
Oh my God.
Plays Billy Chenoweth. And Joanna Cassidy plays Margaret Chenoweth. There are a bunch of other people, so I'm going to stop right there because there are so many people that come in and out of this series, including the best Chris Messina, who comes in the final season. He doesn't come in until season 5. And then just a couple of quick little trivia facts here. So Michael C. Hall, this is Michael C. Hall's first screen role. He had confined himself to New York stage prior to 6 Feet Under. I think right before this, he was doing Cabaret. And I think he even won a Tony, or at least he was nominated for that. Michael C. Hall did win an Emmy for playing David Fisher. He, unlike the Emmys snubbing him for Dexter, he did win for 6 Feet Under.
Can't reward those murderers.
Yeah. And Peter Krauser actually really originally auditioned for the part of David. as he was impressed by the political/human rights message that the role had, and he wanted to stand up for the character. However, the creator, Alan Ball, had found the role of Nate Fisher impossible to cast and was impressed by Krauser and his tangible chemistry with Rachel Griffiths, who plays Brenda Chenoweth, of course. The pilot episode features several spoof commercials for funeral homes and products, and that was supposed to be a recurring theme, but they dropped it after the first episode. And I have to say, rewatching it, I'm very glad they dropped it after the first
Me too.
episode. That would have gotten really obnoxious. It was entertaining, but it would have gotten obnoxious, after a while. 6 Feet Under originated the term, quote unquote, NARM, which is when a moment that is meant to be serious unintentionally becomes funny. Francis, and this will give you a hint on 6 Degrees of Finn Wittrock, which is so easy for this show. Francis Conroy, James Cromwell, and Kathy Bates would all go on to play characters in American Horror Story. They would all go on to be tortured by Ryan Murphy, especially Francis Conroy and Kathy Bates. Well, really, Francis Conroy more than anyone, next to Sarah Paulson, of course. Over the course of the series episode deaths, the causes of deaths were 13 people died from natural causes, 10 people have died from a car accident related fate, 11 people have been murdered, 8 people have committed suicide, 9 people have died from a head injury, 5 people have died of cancer, and 22 people have died from other complications. So there's a lot of death, of course, in this series. It's all about a funeral home. So what else will you expect?
A show about a funeral home? How weird.
I know. So before we dive into this show, and I get to hear Carla's thoughts, all of her thoughts on this show, which is really going to be interesting for me because I can't wait to hear some of her thoughts. Especially, I'm hoping we do get to the episode that is the most controversial episode of this series, and that is season 4, episode 5. That's My Dog. And when we get to that, I'm going to throw in trigger warnings again. So for that episode specifically. So first, though, Carla, what are you into right now in pop culture?
Listen, I had an answer all lined up. I was ready to give an answer for stuff, and now everything in my mind is gone because I spent the entire day streaming 6 Feet Under. So now everything in my life is about 6 Feet Under. I used to have a life, people. I used to have thoughts and interests, and now everything is 6 Feet Under. So I guess my hobby is just IMDbing things and looking up synopses and whatever about 6 Feet Under. That's what I'm into, Erin. What are you into this week?
That was amazing. See, I want to tell you something. If you don't know this, Carla, this show was around the same time as Queer as Folk. And I watched both of these shows. They aired on the exact same night. They were on competing networks. And, people would often compare the two in some respects. People would be like 6 Feet Under is caviar and Queer as Folk is, they would put down Queer as Folk, honestly. Comparatively. But let me tell you, they both ended the same year. And so my heart was completely shattered. I don't think they ended on the same night. That would have been too much.
Oh, can you imagine?
That would have been too much. So, but yeah, I just wanted to throw that out there. So just imagine that, Carla.
I don't want to. Thank you, Erin.
But what I'm into is I watched Thor: Love and Thunder because that's on Disney Plus now. And so I watched that, which of course features our unofficial mascot, Christian effing Bale, as Gore, the god. Now I can't remember. The God Butcher. Sorry, Christian. Sorry. We love you still. You were fantastic, as always. You are always fantastic. You always elevate everything. I did really, really enjoy this movie. Christian Bale is probably in it for a total of about 10 minutes, maybe. So, of course, I always want more Christian Bale. But I did think it was fun. I loved the fact that there was just basically Guns N' Roses all the time. And Chris Hemsworth is so flippin' hilarious. He has such great comedic timing. Like, in the Ghostbusters reboot that came out, the female version of Ghostbusters, he was so hilarious in that movie.
Mhm.
He's so funny. So I enjoyed it. It was a quicker watch, and I appreciated that. So take note, Marvel. You don't have to make all your films 3 hours long, like Avengers.
You mean like every other movie?
Yeah.
Oh my god, seriously.
Yep. So yeah, I watched that. So yeah, I watched that. I didn't need to say it like that. I actually really did enjoy it. But okay, so now we're going to be getting into 6 Feet Under, but of course, trigger warnings. Trigger warning: death, of course, lots of death, murder, suicide, suicidal ideation, gun violence, hate crimes, homophobia, racism, misogyny, incest, mental health issues, sexual assault. Basically, anything you can think of is in here. Drug use, alcoholism, just everything. It's pretty much, if you can think of it, it's in here, sadly, of course. But, hey, it's life. So this is really about life. And I wanted to also say really quickly that the reason Alan Ball wanted to set this in Los Angeles is because, according to him, LA is the world capital of the denial of death. And I thought that was really interesting. And that brings me to the first thing I want to talk about, Carla, is your general overall thoughts on this show, and especially with that concept of, denying death and how it deals with our own feelings about death.
I think that that is like an incredibly astute way of, and I mean, yeah, I'm sure his experience with Los Angeles has a lot of bearing in this, but I feel like that's just true for a lot of places, that nobody, not only does nobody want to die, nobody wants to age anymore. And the longer that our lifespans grow, the more that seems to be the case. Because I feel like there was a lot more acceptance of death and aging before there were so many ways for us to look at each other and ourselves. When you couldn't look at what somebody was doing halfway across the world and how they're aging so much better than you, But and I think that a lot of what um, the concept of death is here in the United States. I feel like there's such a taboo around it, and there's such a taboo against discussing it and really just making your peace with the fact that it happens. There seems to be like an obsession with creating a legacy that lasts forever, and with living your life not for yourself and for the people around you, but for future generations to look back and say, oh, wasn't this person wonderful? And I really like that this show, for all that it um, tells you over and over again, everybody dies. People just die. It's just part of life. It's very natural. It's very normal. But the people in the show have such a hard time with that concept themselves, because you start off the first season. A whole lot of it has. I mean, they're all grieving Nathaniel Senior, but they're they're processing the grief, and they're moving on from it, each in their own way. But then when Nate dies, everything comes to a standstill, and it's like, how could this happen to us? And there are times when Ruth is acting as if she's the only person to have ever lost her child. She's the only person to have ever suffered a loss. When in the very first season, you have pretty much back to back children dying. So um, it does a really good job of distilling the American vision of death and dying, and of bringing forth that idea that no matter how jaded you think you are and how accepting you think you are, you're still scared when it comes close to you.
Yeah, that's the perfect way to put it a lot. Yeah, I mean, and I think one of the characters that, I mean, I think they all are dealing with that, with the fact that they're immersed with death. They're surrounded by death. I mean, they're not kids anymore, of course, but the kids grew up in a funeral home. They grew up with death around them all the time. And yet they still, as adults and as a teenager, Claire starts as a teenager and then becomes an adult through the course of the show, they still don't understand death and they still don't know how to deal with it or accept it. I think that it's interesting. I think because they're surrounded by it so much, it's almost like they feel like they're immune to it and it won't affect them. And then when it does affect them, it affects them so profoundly. When Nate dies, more than anything, when their father dies, yes, it affects them, but in a different way. Like for Nate, it affects him in that his whole life gets changed. And so he's seething with resentment, this underlying resentment throughout the whole series, and for David never ever came out to his father. So his father never really knew him. And so David has all this shame around that and all this other stuff. And Ruth, feeling like she never really lived and all of that. So it's like it affects their lives in a very different way than when someone who I think it's because Nate is younger and nobody expected that to happen. And Nate is the older brother and Nate is the one who kind of seemed like, even though I don't think this is true, but seemed like he had it all together and like he could actually protect everybody. And so when he dies, you see everybody's life just shatter. That's why those last episodes from episode 10 all the way into the finale are so heavy and really hard to watch because everybody's kind of falling apart in different ways. David is completely gone. I mean, he's like shattered because that was his older brother who, as the story he tells during the service, protected him from bullies, protected him from all this stuff. And he's dealing with the aftermath of what happened to him in season 4 still. And so he's feeling totally vulnerable. He's lashing out at people. He doesn't know how to deal with this anymore. He's probably not sure what he even wants to do with his life. And then, of course, you've got Claire starts drinking a lot and doesn't know what she's going to do with her life. And you've got Brenda dealing with the fact that her husband cheated on her, that Nate cheated on her, and that led to his death. And so she's dealing with that. She's dealing with being pregnant, giving birth to a child, and then having the ghost of Nate, which is not really Nate because Nate would never do this, yelling at her and telling her, the child's going to die and you're a horrible person and you would never be a mother. And all this stuff, just her guilt just manifesting and her self-hatred manifesting itself. And so it's so much heavier than dealing with that, even though you've been watching a show that's dealt with death forever, because this was more real. And I think it was more real because, number one, you knew this character more. And so then I think you kind of had to show it have a different impact. And like I said, this wasn't someone anyone expected to die. And right before he died, everything seemed like it was going to be okay. And then he died. It was like one of those just sudden, if he had died in surgery, it might have not seemed as unexpected. If he had died, back when he was first diagnosed earlier, that might not have been as unexpected. But I think because it seemed like everything was going to be okay, it was like the rug being pulled out from underneath this whole entire family that already is so shaky. They're walking on shaky ground 24/7 anyway. And so it was kind of like the final straw. But anyway, that's more about Nate's death than the series overall. But anyway, no, I loved this show. This show was very different and unique at that time. I'd never seen a show handle death in this way, where everything is about death, yet it's also about hiding from death and trying not to deal with death, even though it's right there. I mean, there's so many like conversations they have while they're embalming a body. I mean, that's not normal. They're just so natural about it. And it's just like, and making money off of death and all that kind of sleaziness, and having that right there and, thinking these people would be so accepting of death, yet they are running away from it probably more than anybody else. Probably because they're
Right.
around it all the time. I mean,
Right.
I would think if you're surrounded by death, you'd be like,
oh, well, this one's gone.
or that's enough death for me. Yeah. Well, let's get into we're gonna talk about the families or a little bit different. I did put Keith aside as just a separate character just because I thought it was very, very important to focus on him separately. Um, and I don't know if you read a lot of the articles about how people look at the Keith and David relationship, but we'll definitely get into that. But the Fishers consist, of course, of Ruth and Nathaniel, were the mother and father. Nathaniel dies the first episode. And then you've got Nate is the oldest brother, David is the middle brother. And then you've got Claire, who, when the show opens, she's still in high school. And then by the time the show ends, she's pretty much, she dropped out of college, but then she's going to go to New York. And then I am putting in an honorable mention, of course, for Bettina. But I want to say when we say our favorites, because I know it'd be tempting to say her, I just mean the actual Fishers. And then also, you've also got Sarah, who is Ruth's sister, is also in this, who is played by the incredible. Why is her name all of a sudden escaping me? This is so weird because I adore her. How am I forgetting her name? Oh my gosh. How am I forgetting her name? I have all the names up here too. I'm sorry, everybody. This is me being silly. Everybody's screaming at their.
I know her face.
Patricia Clarkson. Patricia
Totally.
Clarkson is Sarah.
That's exactly what I was going to say just a second.
So, what are your general thoughts on the Fishers, and then who is your favorite?
The Fishers, they're, the synopsis of the show says it's a dysfunctional family, but I feel like it's just a normal family who has a lot of stuff going on. I don't think that they're that much more dysfunctional than a lot of other families out there. But, Nathaniel Sr. dies and a lot of things change for them because they have to kind of band together, and it's a lot of it is more because of guilt than because they want to do something. And it's funny that I think it's the penultimate episode, or maybe the episode before that, that's called Stasis, which is interesting because the whole family is in stasis the entire run of the show. It's not until the very end that they start to move forward, because it's not just about grieving Nathaniel Sr. and moving on. It's about them doing what they want with their lives and really living their lives, which they don't the entire time that this show is going until right at the end. So they're all searching for something. They're all searching for a bigger meaning in life. They're all searching for somebody to tell them what the bigger meaning is. But they go about it in such different ways. Ruth is, she starts out very meek and very quiet, and nobody in this family likes to open up, but she likes to open up the least. She wants her children to come to her with everything, but she doesn't do the same. So she hasn't set an example of openness. How can she expect her children to be open with her when she's not open with them? And she's also she's such a sad person throughout most of the show. She wants family, she wants love, she wants affection, and she doesn't know how to get it. And a lot of it is because she has martyred herself over and over again. Because it's a noble thing that she took care of her grandmother, and that she raised her children, and she does this and she does that. But there's also a bit of martyrdom in there. She doesn't really, Sarah just took off. But like she says at some point to Ruth, it's because you didn't want me to help. Every time that I tried to help, you would push me away. And that's not somebody who's just doing things because they feel like they should, or out of anything pure. That's just somebody who wants to have that complex of like, oh, I have to do everything myself, and oh, everything's so hard for me, and nobody even tries to help me. And she does this over and over again. She does it with George. And I mean, like, let me just say, George absolutely, I mean, he didn't disclose some really, really important, like, he has a hidden child, he has a hidden illness, these crucial things that he doesn't share with her. And it's not just because it was a whirlwind romance. It's because George goes through these whirlwind romances cyclically to avoid being truthful. But Ruth dives into this relationship with him, and then she, does this whole thing where like, oh, I guess I'm gonna be stuck being the caretaker. But it's also at a crossroads in her life when she's ready to not be that anymore. But the way that she goes about it is so cruel. Because yes, George is a horrible person for all the stuff that he did, but she was really cruel towards the end of their relationship before
Mhm.
they got back together. Um, and she exhibits this cruelty over and over again with her children, where I think especially like she's really hard on David. I mean, Nate is clearly her favorite. Nate is,
Oh, yeah.
and Claire is the one that she mostly ignores. She wants this closeness with Claire, but she doesn't really do much. She makes a few attempts here and there, but she doesn't try to get to know Claire for who Claire is. She tries to make Claire bend to her image of who Claire should be. But she's really mean to David. Like she's everything that goes wrong, she finds a way to blame him. Everything that and it's especially awful um, when he's going through his PTSD and when they all lose Nate, and she's peppering him with all of these questions like, why didn't you do this? Why didn't like basically why didn't you save the brother I liked better? Why did
Mhm.
you let the one I actually like die? And so it's hard to have a lot of sympathy for her as a mother when she prides herself on her being a mother, but she's not as good at it as she wants to think that she is. Um, but at the same time, like I still really do feel for her because she's never really had a chance to live for herself. And everything that I said before, notwithstanding, she just every time that you look at her, there's just such sadness in her eyes, and it's really hard. And she throws herself into like with Nikolai, and trying to buy his way out of
I'm like, "Oh my
out of the
god."
mafia. Which and let me tell you, like when we first meet Nikolai and oh Russia this Russia that, it's like okay, if they bring the Russian mafia into this, I'm out. I hate anything where any show is like, oh, we're gonna bring in the Russian mafia. Why? Why the Russian mafia? Any kind of mafia, it's like, don't do it. Just don't. Find something else. Why the Russian mafia? But anyway, so they bring in the Russian mafia and then quickly dispose of them, which I was very happy with. But this is again her trying to, you know, uh, fix things her way and push herself in there. And when she says later on that she and David are so alike, yeah, this is why you're so horrible to him because you can't stand to see somebody else. But at the same time, she's actually more like Claire because she and Claire are constantly trying to fix these useless men who are worthless.
It's true.
So, and that's the bulk of their lives. Now, to segue into Claire, Claire spends like the first, you know, uh, 4/5 of the show trying to fix up these lousy men. She goes through the Gabes and the Phils and the Russells and the Billies of the world, with this idea that if only she can love them enough, she can fix them. And there's a bit of selfishness in that too, and you can see that especially with Gabe because when she's trying to rescue Gabe, it's more because she wants to feel worthy. Like she wants to feel like her like the light that she puts into this world means something. And I don't know, Gabe is just awful to her and to a lot of people. And certainly the death of his brother and the way that he was treated by his family for it did nobody any favors. But I think Claire really it was like the prime example. It really sets the tone of who she is in the beginning. And it is really wonderful when she starts to grow out of it towards the end, when she's done with the art world. And I think like the show kind of casts the art world in a very condescending light. Like artists are, like all they're just potheads who, are so pretentious, and they their view of the world is just so high and mighty, and let's take them down a peg. That's what it feels like, because it's not until she meets some schmo named Ted
Shimo. Shimo.
that she finds a guy who is not like this tortured soul that she needs to rescue. But Claire is also, she has like some of the clearest insights in the show from the time that she's a teenager. Like, she can really see things. She has like just a such an incisive intellect. And when she goes through her drinking phase and loses her job after Nate dies, I think that, I don't know, like, to me it didn't feel like Claire, like a way that Claire would deal, but at the same time, like, I get why they went in that direction. Um, but we'll talk more about that in a minute. Um, well, it's Nate. I mean, okay, Nate, I think, is not just Ruth's favorite. I think he's the writer's favorite, because in a lot of ways, the show revolves around Nate.
Oh, yeah.
And yeah, whenever something goes good or bad in Nate's life, it affects the whole family, and everything revolves around Nate's decisions, his thoughts, his foibles, everything comes out of Nate's thoughts and actions. And um it's going to sound awful, but hear me out. I feel like things don't get better for the family until Nate dies. And yes, they plummet into a depression and they don't know how to handle anything, and it's really hard for them. But it's after that they begin to flourish, because in a lot of ways, Nate's decision to stay, even though, like, David wanted his help and Ruth wanted his help and whatever, Claire was indifferent at the time, but Nate's decision to stay really pinned everybody into a place that was not helpful for any of them. And that, it's a lot of Nate's energy, because for him, everything is about his discovery and his journey through life. And the way that he treats women is also awful, and very, very, he's very into himself. His love for Brenda, I really think that they did love each other. They have such good chemistry, but at the same time, their love is very selfish, both of them. And Nate is very selfish in the way that he approaches anybody. Like, I don't know that his thing with Maggie would have been a good thing in the end. Yes, he looked like the most in love he had ever looked. He looked the most serene that he had ever looked with her, but he's such an innately selfish person that I don't think that would have been enough to sustain a to sustain them as a couple. I mean, look at the way that he, even when he was holding Maya, it didn't feel like it just it
No,
just didn't feel like, yeah, it
I
didn't
agree.
feel like he really loved her. It just felt like she was there and he had to hold her, and because he's clinging on to things from his past and he's making Maya a vessel of that. So there's just so much selfishness in him, but he's still a great character. Like, he's a great character. Peter Krause did a fantastic job playing him. I mean, just,
Yeah.
and I was messaging you earlier saying that the casting in the show is superb, and everybody was so good in their roles. It was just breathtaking. Like, you can't really picture anybody else as these characters. But I think especially Nate and David were just so well cast, so perfect for the roles that they inhabited. And I mean, I could just go on forever about Nate, because he really is fascinating. He's fascinating. He's complex. And I think that because the thing is, like, I can't even say that I don't like him. I don't like the way that he behaved. I don't like his selfishness. I didn't like his treatment of the women in his world. But he's the kind of guy that I think you could like, regardless, because he's just a charming dude. He's just a guy that you might want to, like, sit down and have a beer with, or in his case, maybe 7 of them and a joint.
Yes.
That's just how he rolls. But the thing with him that I think is so tragic is that he was searching so hard for meaning in life, especially after he got his diagnosis. once he found out that there's something in his brain and that who knows how long he has to live, he acts as if it's a death sentence. When they're telling him it might be, it might not be, which is honestly the same as anybody else on the planet. Because yes,
Mhm.
he could die from this brain thing at any point. He might die young. He did. But look at how many other people also come through his funeral home who died of causes that had nothing to do with how their brains work, that had to do with just happenstance or with being in the wrong place at the wrong time, or, but because he's Nate, everything's tragic and everything's about him and it's awful. Oh, I didn't even get into Lisa. So, like, speaking of honorary Fishers, Lisa.
Yeah, I was definitely going to talk about her because that's one of my favorite actresses in the world, by the way,
Oh my
Lily
God, me
Taylor.
too.
She's
Lily
I
Taylor.
met her. She's the sweetest person I've ever met in my life.
Seriously?
Yeah,
Oh, she
sorry, I didn't
seems
mean
like
to
she would be
interrupt her,
super
but
sweet.
she's
No, no,
and
no.
super shy, super shy.
Really? Oh, but she's, oh, she, like, when I saw her in this, I was like, oh my God, I'm so happy to see her. Because yeah, I love her in almost everything that I've seen her in. But in this, and her character is one that is such an enigma because Nate doesn't really take the time to get to know her. Yes, you know that
Mhm.
she and Nate, were on and off friends with benefits, and that she has that they have this really strong connection and everything like that. But you know, she does trap him, even though she says she doesn't, and that she doesn't want anything to do with him. In the end, she's really trying to trap him, and she's very happy when they go off and get married, and tries to la her way through him not actually wanting to be with her. So when it becomes very, very clear that he doesn't want to be with her, she takes off. And it's not until after that you find out that, she's been sleeping with her sister's husband, that she's had all of these. And it's the kind of thing that seems like completely against everything that Lisa would stand for. So this is yet another hypocrite in the family. And the way that she ended was so sad. And it's also one of the things that I like so much about the show is that it doesn't neatly wrap it up for you, because you
Mhm.
don't really know whether Hoyt killed her. You don't really know whether she walked into the ocean. Everything is implied. Everything is implied. And I really like that. Like, I'm sure some people would prefer it to be more buttoned up. But one of the great things with the writing of the show is that it's written like a very long, very good book.
That's a very good way of putting it because that's very true. Yeah.
Yeah, it's
Mhm.
oh, um, and then, and David is my favorite, which is why I saved him for last.
Yay! So glad. I was like, good. I'm like, please let her like David the Mouse.
I love David the most. And I'll tell you, what, I will say I spent a lot of the show going, Dexter would never let that happen. Dexter would have killed this guy as soon as he saw him. Do you think Dexter could have gotten kidnapped like that? No, man. That guy would have been on his knees begging instead. What are you talking about? David. Oh, and then like, you see David in the basement, like sewing up somebody or working on somebody. I was like, oh, Dexter's gonna be ripping them apart. Like, I wonder how Michael C. Hall felt about working in basically like these conditions over fake corpses for like what, like 13 to 15 years of his life.
That's true. I'll ask him when I interview him.
Please do. So, Michael C. Hall, in what way did it affect you psychologically and spiritually to sometimes murder, sometimes put together corpses? Tell us more. Um, but David is he okay, Nate is the most complex, but to me, David is the most interesting because he is somebody who is he wants to present a certain veneer. He doesn't feel like he can be himself almost ever, either because he's trying to hide the fact that he's gay or that he has feelings. Because just as everything revolves around Nate, everything also everything being able to revolve around Nate depends on David being able to carry the burdens that Nate leaves behind.
Right.
So Nate just can't go off and work at a doggy daycare whenever the hell he wants if it's not David picking up the slack at work. He can't. Um, the house can't function without David because Ruth has washed her hands of everything except for when she really wants to make her presence known. He can't let everything fall apart because Claire needs somebody to be a stable adult in her life. And even though you don't get very many scenes of Claire and David together, to me, those are some of the best scenes of the
Agree.
show because they are two people who have so much more depth to them, um, and their interactions feel more okay. Where when Nate and David are together, it's such a sibling bond. It's a beautiful sibling bond. But when it's David and Claire, it's a very different sibling bond that I think has more tenderness in it and a lot more
Mhm.
truth in it because I feel like they're more open with each other and they're more supportive of each other. Whereas with Nate, they have to be supportive of him because otherwise Nate can't function.
Very
And
true.
people tell David, "Oh, you're so sensitive. You're so that," and he is. But the thing is, he's not allowed to show it. And the his dynamic with Keith, and we'll get more into it when we talk about Keith, is volatile, especially in the middle seasons, because he's so repressed. He can't express himself anywhere else, so he expresses everything when he's with Keith. And he really, but he's also very uh what's the word? He doesn't want to let people in as much as he's loving and accepting. He doesn't want to let people in, and that is, I think, one of the biggest things with his confrontations with Rico, because he doesn't see Rico as an equal or even as somebody similar. And a lot of that, I have to wonder if there's some racism wrapped up in it, because he
Mhm.
doesn't have the same problems with Arthur. He in fact buys Arthur a suit, but anytime that Rico says anything or wants to do anything, David automatically shoots him down.
Mhm.
And well, in addition to that, I also wonder if there isn't a bit of jealousy there because Nathaniel Sr. was so accepting and inclusive of Rico to the point where he sent the guy to school to do what he does. That I wonder if maybe David didn't feel a bit left out in that sense, and
Yeah.
he's taking it out on Rico. But the show never really explores that, and I think that that's something that I would have liked to have seen. This show has like the show is almost perfect in its writing, but I would like to have seen some more insight into the root of that dynamic because it leaves you a lot to guess. And when we get to Rico, like I'll talk more about that, about the treatment of Latinx characters in this show. But all that aside, David is still my absolute favorite. I really um I wanted everybody in the show to end up with happiness. I really wanted it for David because I feel like he put so much more of his happiness aside than almost anybody did,
Mhm.
and not in the way that Ruth did it, where Ruth did it because she has like a martyr complex. David, I think, did it because it was put on him by his family, where you're the responsible one. Like, how many times did Nate put things on him and said, "Well, you're the one who's better at this. You're the one who can talk through these to these people." And David just kind of, grins and bears it. And it breaks my heart.
Yes, I cannot tell you how happy I am that you love David the most because this is one of my well, I'll get to him later. I'll do the other characters first because I really love David so much. Um so I will talk about Ruth first. Ruth, it's so hard to add to what you said because you said it so perfectly. So it's hard without repeating everything. But I do agree. My heart breaks for her. And Frances Conroy, the acting in this is phenomenal. She is one of the best actresses working today, period. And she's so good in this, playing this woman who she even looks older than she is. She looks beat down. She looks like she basically never cared about herself at all, but yet she allowed herself to never care about herself. So it was like, I'm never going to care about myself, but I'm going to allow myself to never care about myself. I'm never going
Mhm.
to, I'm going to put, like the whole thing of the scene where she's cutting her own hair because she hasn't gone back to the hairdresser because she had been having an affair with him before when she was still married. But she still doesn't think about going and getting her hair cut because she doesn't feel that that's something that is really like important. But at the same time, it's not just the fact that she doesn't think she's worth it. It's that she feels she has to present herself that way. And that's the way she'll get attention, I think, is if she sits there and she does. It's very different than David, because David puts himself last too, but I don't feel like David does it to get attention. David does it because that's where he always feels that's what his place is. And I think Ruth does it because that's the only way she gets attention, is the martyrdom thing, is putting herself last. And my heart breaks for her. It does, because I think she's treated like crap a lot of times. Her and Claire, their combativeness in the first season, especially, it's very much a teen thing, though. It's very much Claire is a teenager, and Claire is very much a teenager. That first season, rewatching it, I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm gonna punch you. I was like, you're such a snobby little teenager, especially when they're reading the will.
Same.
When they're reading the will, and she's like, oh, that's all I get. It's just a trust fund. I'm like, oh my God, you little brat.
I know, like, fine, then give it to me.
I know. I'm like, you little brat. She was such a brat. And when her mom's like, let's go watch a movie, let's do this, and she's just like, F you, mom. You're not cool. That's why I loved when they went away to go visit that their cousin was, and they were so annoying. It was a mother and daughter, and they were so like, we love each other. We do everything together.
Well, they
And
were
then
watching
Ruth
the
goes
Gilmore
like,
Girls, and they have the
that's
Gilmore
right.
Girl dynamic.
That's
And it's
right.
like, okay, well.
Yes, and I understand. When I was watching the Gilmore Girls, I wanted to run. Sorry, I know that's one of our most
Same.
popular episodes. So, but yeah, I love when Ruth wakes Claire up in the middle of the night and says, "Let's hurry up before they make us get up and go to like spinning or whatever the class was they were doing." So I liked when they would have those moments, and I liked it when Ruth would kind of be in her power, as long as she wasn't lashing out at someone else that didn't deserve it. Because there were times when I was like, holy crap, even though Claire would drive me nuts in the beginning, the whole towards the end, when Claire was like, didn't want to be in school anymore, and she was upset because she didn't have money anymore. And yes, she was kind of acting a little selfish and entitled. A lot of these characters act very selfish and entitled. But the way Ruth would talk to her was so, whoa, it was like, she basically would say, just shut the hell up. This isn't about you. It was like she had all this anger so deep down, and she just every once in a while would let out, because she never would before. She'd repress it so much that it would just burst out of her chest, kind of thing. But she did break my heart at the same time. And George was by far the worst relationship she was in, I think, throughout the whole series. I think that was the worst relationship she was in. And I think that was because George was trying to find a mother, because, you see his mom was like horrible and awful and abusive and stuff. And you saw that when he was a child, and he had to take care of her. And so now he's just looking for a mother figure, but he's just horrible, awful. But however, when Ruth is taking care of George, when she learns that he has an illness, and she's taking care of him, and he gets confused and everything, the way she talks to him is so atrocious. I'm like, he can't help this. It's not his fault. And yes, he shouldn't have kept it from you. And yes, I know you're stuck in this situation that you don't want to be in, but don't talk to him like this. I thought that was awful. And then
Yeah.
making the daughter that he abandoned stay there and help her take care of him was just also awful. And then to rent an apartment, excuse me, and with all the intention of trying to just move him out without actually speaking. It's like nobody says what they're supposed to say. It's so frustrating. And so
And she's the worst about it.
really is. If she just said that, yeah.
Mhm.
But one scene that I want to point out that I just cracked up with her is when she goes with Hiram. She goes, in the last season, she goes and they go out. I don't know if you saw this episode, Carla, because I know you had to unfortunately skip a couple, but there's an episode in season 5. Oh, you must. Yes, you would have, because this is
Yes.
episode 9 when Nate dies. And so she's off in the woods, and when she's walking back and she sees all the guys, she starts shooting them all like at an that was hilarious.
Yes. Oh my god. And the way that they all fall backwards.
It cracked me up. And then when the last one is Nathaniel, and she's really she's like, oh yeah, Nathaniel. And then she's like, oh, still gonna.
It was so like, I was so happy for her to have that moment of even imaginary catharsis.
I know. I was laughing so hard. That was so funny. But Yes, she is. And I do want to say, though, I love her friendship with Bettina. I think that's one of the best things that happens in her life, because this is a character that, that is like everything Ruth could be if Ruth could just let go and breathe a little bit. And that's why I'm glad that she ends up living with Bettina in the end, because I just think Bettina is so healthy for her. Bettina is just
Yeah.
like, no, we got to live. And, like, oh, you don't have to have these men. You don't have to be with a man to be happy. You don't have to. I mean, look, she's just cool and awesome. And she gives her a little bit of a relief from that feeling like she has to be a martyr. And I really appreciated that so much, especially with older women, and showing that kind of thing was really nice and appreciative. And I did appreciate that they did show her having a healthy, I don't think they were healthy relationships, but she did have a sex life. And so I did appreciate that as well, that they didn't just make her like this widow, for the rest of the series. So
Yeah,
I did.
I meant to mention that it's
Yeah.
really wonderful to see a show not just hint at a sexually fulfilled older woman, but to frequently show her, and unfortunately that have the whole
For
family
sure.
have to hear
Very
her being
sad. Yeah,
satisfied.
very much.
Yes, the wedding night, it was so
It was
all
so
those
uncomfortable.
kids.
That was so uncomfortable. Yeah. Yeah. No, yeah. Yeah. And Claire, oh, Claire, I really struggled with Claire sometimes. I mean, because of that, so whiny and so, and they really played. And I've known artists like this. I've known people like Claire. I've known a lot of Claires, and very much that I'm an artist and that makes me better than you peons that aren't artists. And she had that big time. And while I loved some of the stuff, she, like when she went to work in the office and she sings the song about pantyhose.
Oh, that was amazing.
So awesome.
You, what is it?
Oh, no, I wish I could
Something
remember.
my thighs. You right up my
Yes.
thighs.
It was so amazing. Or when she sings, when she thinks she's in love with Gabe in the first, when they have sex and all that stuff, and then Gabe's such an asshole, but
Yeah,
and typical teenage boy, really. But
really. Well, except for like,
well, except for the other stuff. But with the first season, before his little brother tragically dies, that was when she's singing in the kitchen and she's so happy she's in love. She's just I love a lot of the fantasy sequences, but yeah,
all the
she's
musical ones were my favorite.
yes, yes. Um, but she is kind of taking after her mother in a lot of ways. She's a lot more outspoken than her mother, but she takes after her mother. Whoops, in that whole thing, like you were saying, Carla, with the whole wanting to save men, and this is a reality for a lot of women. A lot of women feel like they can save a man, especially a broken man. And she does that a lot. And she tries to do it more than once with Billy, big time. And of course with Gabe and Russell. Oh my gosh, I hate Russell. And he's so obnoxious. He's just like, oh, feel my tragic artist life. I'm like, oh,
Yes.
fuck
Well,
off.
I feel like Russell is the distillation of all of these guys. Like he is
That's
the pure
true.
essence of all of them. And I love that he was played by Ben Foster, because I love Ben Foster.
Yeah.
I think that he plays a lot of creepy guys, but I think he does it well.
Yes.
And just, oh my god, I just, when I saw him, I was like, and he starts out like, just kind of sweet and shy and whatever. I was like, oh, I wonder how weird this is gonna get. I can't wait to see.
I know, and he's just and he's like obsessed with Claire, and he treats her so awfully because she doesn't want it to put up with his bullshit because he cheated on her, and she's like, I don't want to deal with you.
Right. Oh my god.
Yeah, yuck, yeah. And we'll of course get to Billy here in a minute because I'm sure we all have lots of thoughts on Billy.
Yeah.
Besides the fact that Jeremy says to unfollowed me on Twitter, whatever. I'm so over that though.
Oh yes, you're so over that you mentioned it twice in the span of an hour. So over it.
Yeah. But what I appreciate about Claire is later on is that even though she is struggling with trying to find out what she wants to do, which is so typical of it's typical like now, I still struggle with that. So it doesn't go away, but it's really typical when you're in your early 20s. And I remember when I first watched this show, I was more around Claire's age when this show was first on, a couple years older than her, but I was around that age. So I think during my first watch of it, I related a lot to her in a very different way. It was kind of like, oh yeah, I know that feeling of like, I'm working in an office, but I really want to be an artist, but I don't know how to be an artist, and I can't get any kind of, like inspiration, and what should I do with my life, and that kind of feeling. And so she's so lost, but I like that she eventually kind of just decides, you know what, I could find happiness as an artist or whatever I decide to do without having to have that burden of it being terrible, of it being depressing. And that's what I appreciated about her. And I think that's why she lives I mean, she dies at 98 years old. So it's like that and I'm not saying like all the other people didn't, have happiness. I just think that she finally just realized that you don't have to be tortured to be an artist. You don't have to be tortured to be a human being. And I think that's a lot of what that final episode was about for her, and what Nate was trying to tell her, and what her mom was trying to tell her, was that you don't have to live this tortured life. You can go be happy. And yes, she meets a very, button up Republican. That's part of it was annoying, but very Republican lawyer who always wears a suit, who dresses like a dork and listens to top 40 music and and has a really nice ass. And I was like,
no lies detected.
It's like, I forgot you could see Chris Messina's ass in this. I forgot that.
What an unexpected treat.
But I like, putting aside the fact that he's a Republican, I did like that she got to have a relationship with a guy who, number one, their first date, he stays in the hospital with her the whole time.
Yes.
None of the other men she dated would have done that. None of them. They would have made it about themselves somehow. They would have abandoned her mid thing. And he stayed. He came back after she was drunk and yelled at him and said she hated him and all that kind of stuff. He came back. So, and then you got the feeling in the finale, they were separated for years, and then they met again at her mom's funeral, saw each other, and then they got married. And, so I think he was actually putting aside that icky side. I think he was really perfect for her.
Listen, I think what happened in the intervening years between when she left and when they got back together at Ruth's funeral, what I think happened is that he went through a whole cleanse where he started seeing things clearly, because he started looking at what things were really like, and maybe he met some people who were not white Republicans, and he was like, oh man, what have I been doing with my entire life? And so he's like, maybe I don't want to be an uptight Republican anymore, and I don't support wars anymore. So by the time that she got back, he was cleansed of all of that muck.
I would like to believe that you're right, because
I am making it right.
He was a dork, but he was too good to be a Republican. I'm sorry.
Thank you. Yes.
I would believe Russell would become a Republican. And then Nate. Oh my gosh, I struggle with Nate. Who I struggled so much with Nate in this rewatch. When I first watched this show, during the first couple of seasons, Nate was my favorite character, and I loved Nate. And then I thought they destroyed Nate. When in reality, they didn't destroy Nate. Nate was always the way he was from the very beginning. Nate is a very, very selfish character. He's so self-involved. He treats women like trash. And I have major issues with Brenda, and we'll get to that in a minute. But he still is awful to her. He's awful to the way he treats Lisa is disgusting. The car scene when they're driving back from going camping and they had finally had great sex, according to Nate. Not necessarily according to Lisa, but yes, she had fun, but according to Nate, that was the great sex. And when they're driving back and she's like, oh yeah, that reminds me of the time when you had just broken up with so-and-so and you came to my place and we had amazing sex. Oh yeah. And then the other time when you just broke it up with so-and-so and we had made, and you can see there's this moment of realization on Nate's face where he's like, wow, I'm an asshole.
Right. And it's like the reason that they had such great sex is because he had a vision of Brenda while he was out hiking alone.
Exactly. Exactly. So he's picturing, yeah, that's,
Because
I
he did
mean,
it again. Like he didn't even have to have like a breakup with Brenda. He had a mentally like an imaginary conversation with Brenda, and suddenly he was all hot for Lisa again.
exactly. Yeah. So he used Lisa a lot, treated her like trash. I did not blame her for Lisa. When this show first was on, Lisa was a hated character. People hated this character. They thought of her as a villain. They didn't like her at all. Um, they just couldn't stand her. And Lily Taylor had no idea what was going to happen to her character. And when she learned the fate of her character, she was like, "Whoa, that's tragic." And it was tragic. And it was tragic the time that it happened. And but I do agree. I do like that you never really know. No, I mean, Hoyt was an awful, horrible human being. You could tell that, but you still don't know for sure if he killed her or not. You're not positive on that. And you'll never know. And so it is sad that that's left up, but I think that actually makes, I don't know, it fits more with the way life is in general, sadly enough.
Because you don't always get all the
You don't know.
answers.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. But Nate, and the way Nate would, he'd screw things up at the business all the time. He would break the rules, bend the rules, and then David had to flip and clean up all his messes, and he'd be like, "Well, I just think we should do things differently." And he's like, "Do you real? I mean, they got sued because of things he did. He would. I mean, he was like." He was awful at that job. He should not be in that job, number one, and he knew
No.
it. But he was kind of like, "Well, I hate this job and I'm stuck here and I'm just going to fuck up if I want to. I don't care. I don't care if everybody else has to pay for it, especially my brother." And yeah, he was just so self-absorbed. And so when I was rewatching, I was like, "No, they never ruined Nate. You just liked Nate at first and then you slowly grew to realize who Nate was."
Well, that's
Uh,
the whole thing with Nate is that he has this presentation of just being this affable, wonderful guy, and it's when you get to know him at a deeper level that you're like, wow, so everything's about you, huh?
Yeah. He's the typical Gen X guy. He's a very typical of a Gen X guy who was very laid back and loved Nirvana and idolized Kurt Cobain and all that whole thing. But deep down he was still just a guy and he was still just selfish and self-absorbed and wanted what he wanted when he wanted it. The way he treated Brenda after they got married. See, that was the thing that would happen with Nate. Once he had someone, he treated them like crap. And
Hmm.
he was like the grass is always greener kind of person. And I mean, when he was with Lisa, all he could do was think about Brenda. And then when he was with Brenda, then he's just like, "Oh, you're so annoying." Then he meets Maggie. And so all he can think about is Maggie. And it's always someone that's the opposite of who he's with in some way. And so he's
Yes.
always looking for something better. And the way he treated Brenda when Brenda was pregnant again, when Brenda got pregnant again, and the way he talked about that child, like he basically didn't care about that child. And it just, I don't know, it really, really bothered me. That really, really bothered me. And he had no remorse at all for cheating on Brenda when she's pregnant. And no
Yeah.
remorse. No, he's
No,
like, "I'm
the
going to
way
be
that
happy now."
yes, like the way that he treats Brenda, and oh, I was telling my husband like because my husband sat down with me and watched this show like for the most part, and I was telling him that when it's awful that the last conversation she had with her husband was him basically breaking up with her.
Yeah, and that's why she's haunted by him. I
Yeah.
think that's a big part of it, is that she's like, and the fact that Maggie, I don't really have anything against Maggie per se, but the fact that Maggie didn't even admit to it, didn't even like apologize for it was really kind of shitty.
Hmm.
And so it just, but I do want to say, even though Nate frustrates me to no end, and I always wanted to be like, "Dude, be kinder to the people in your life, especially, your family, your brother. You treat your brother like trash, and your brother's had to deal with this, with his sexuality and coming out and all of that stuff and hiding that and not knowing what to do with that and dealing with the fact that, his dad will never know and all of that. And just be kinder, be like the person you proclaim that you are. He never was the person he said he was. And yes, the show
Yeah.
was very much centered on Nate. It was very much Nate. And that's why I think it's so fascinating that he was the character that died first of those main fishers. That he died first was really interesting. And I'm not going to fight you on that, even though it was heartbreaking when that episode first aired. At first, I was kind of like, whoa, Nate might be changing. There might be something changing in Nate. Nate might become a better person. And I remember watching that episode and you're scared and then you're like, well, they won't kill him. And you think everything's going to be okay. And then when he dies, and David being there when he died too, it was, that was devastating. And I remember watching that live. Everybody was just in shock. People that watched the show, it was just not expected, which I appreciated they did it. And I don't think they did it for shock value. I think they did it because that stuff can happen. And you wouldn't expect the character that the show centers around to have that happen, even though after that, a lot of what people are dealing with centers on him. But it's also dealing with the fact that, okay, maybe now, like you said, Carla, they can kind of have their own life after Nate, and they can move on and they can grow beyond him, and they don't have to be burdened with having to make him happy. So I did appreciate that, but it was still a
It's a
devastating
shock.
loss. And
Yeah.
yeah, it was very shocking. And yeah, but yeah, Peter Krauser is just phenomenal in this role. He's absolutely, just love him. And now for David. I love David. Oh my God, I love David. I love David so dang much. And when I first started this show, I actually did not like David very much. At the first season, I was not a big fan of him. And I mean, I felt for him, but I was like, oh, okay, whatever. And then I think David has one of the best journeys on the show, and he has the hardest journey on the show. And it's not just because he has the journey of coming out and of accepting himself and being okay with that, and being okay with being himself around other people outside of his relationship with Keith. Because up until he comes out in the first season, he pretty much the only people that know are, the church that he goes to with Keith and Keith. So basically the only people that know, I mean, you don't know beforehand what happened, that he was engaged to a woman before, all that stuff, but you don't know if anybody else before Keith knew intimately who David was. And Keith is really the only person in the show that knows who David is, truly. And I think that causes a lot of strife in their relationship. And we'll get to Keith, of course, soon too, because there's a totally different side there with Keith too. But David he takes so much on, and he doesn't allow himself time to really breathe and grieve when things happen to him. When he's carjacked, he doesn't allow himself to grieve that until it just gets too much that he has to, that he's really told to. When his brother dies, even though you can see him falling apart and his PTSD is coming back big time, he still has to go and he has to wash his brother's body. And the whole scene where he's there washing the body, and then you watch like Ruth comes in and she's like, oh, and then Claire, oh, and I'm like, does no one want to say, oh my gosh, David, how are you dealing with the fact that you have to sit here and wash your brother's body? I
Right.
mean, that's a lot for anyone to have to handle. And the fact that Ruth is so cruel and mean to him during that time, and like blaming him for that. He did nothing wrong. He did nothing. It wasn't,
No.
nothing of it was his fault, but people like to do that with David. It's always David's fault. Everything is on David. David has to clean up everybody's mess. David is, David's the uptight one. David's the loser. David's the this, that. And he is the most sensitive one, but what I think it is he's so guarded, and he has like this huge wall up, and it's because he's felt so invisible his whole life, and he's been living in the shadow of the brother that was the cool one, and the brother that his mom clearly loved more, and then his dad clearly loved more. and all of that. And the dad part you don't know for sure because you're getting all of that from an unreliable not narrator, but an unreliable narrative there because you are seeing the ghost of Nathaniel, which isn't necessarily who Nathaniel was. It's just who they are perceiving who he was. But so David is just so stuck in this self-hatred in a lot of respects. And he so wants to be free in himself. And he has, I think, the best fantasies of anybody in the show. And he has so many of his fantasies. I mean, not his PTSD ones, except for in the final episode, but I won't talk about that till we get to that. But except for those ones, so many of his fantasies are about breaking free and being so much himself. And they revolve so much around singing. And I'm sure they did a lot of that because Michael C. Hall is an amazing singer. But he's just like in the first season when he's dancing around in the funeral home and he's dancing, and then I just love it. And then his mom's like, David, what are you doing? And he's like, what? I can't. And I just love it when he does that. And I love that he joins like the gay males chorus, and he does that. And it's so much like he's able to access a part of himself that I think he's always wanted to. And then he finally did. And it was so like liberating for him he's like, oh, I can be with a lot of more gay men around me. I can have that life. I can explore this creative side of myself that I've always wanted to explore and never did before, and all of that. And I just love watching him. And Michael C. Hall is one of the best actors around. Everybody knows I love Michael C. Hall. I don't think I need to love Michael C. Hall, but I do. I love that man. And I think he's fantastic in this. And, this character is so far removed from Dexter. There's not even an ounce of Dexter in this character because Dexter would hate this character as well.
Yes, he would. There was
David
also
was
not
terrified of
nearly as much mouth breathing. I kept checking for it, and there was some, but not nearly as much as with Dexter. It was amazing.
See, that tells you that was a character. That was an actor choice for the character. It's not Michael C. Hall.
Well, when you interview him, you can ask him.
Yeah.
Unless he just sits there and like, when you're about to ask a question, he's just like, and then we'll have an answer without you having to ask it.
Yes, but I love you, Michael C. Hall. Everybody knows I love you. But I just think he's so good in this role. And when David starts to not be as repressed in himself, and when he allows himself those moments of happiness, and when he becomes a father, I think that's what David was always meant to do, was to be a father. And the scene when he first meets Anthony, did you watch that episode when he first meets Anthony?
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. That was like, I was really glad the surrogate thing didn't work out. Plus that surrogate was annoying. So,
yes, she was.
I was like, she's weird. Yes.
Yeah.
I'm like, don't go, Keith. I was really surprised Keith wanted to go with her, frankly. I think it's just Keith wanted the baby thing and he wanted it to be part of him. Mm-hmm. But that scene where David meets Anthony on the playground, and he has that connection, and Anthony even teases him that you'll never be an astronaut. All that stuff was so sweet. And you really saw a different side of David, where David, and I don't mean David should be a father because he is a caretaker. I mean it just because it's natural fit for him. He was really, except for when he was dealing with his brother's death, he was really kind to them. I mean, he was like, no, we should go to this play because I remember when I did a play and I didn't have my dad there, and we should do that. And it actually really, really, they loved that. It wasn't, and then when he does the prayer and the,
oh my God. Oh.
And watching Anthony and Darrell, especially Darrell, because Darrell is so, which you understand why Darrell is so guarded. I would be too. And him just being like, I'm gonna start crying. Because at first they're kind of like, why are we still going on with this prayer? And then him just saying, you gave me a home, to them was just, I'm sorry, it just makes me cry. Yes. Because it is true. It's like he finally found his purpose, and his, without it being something that felt like a burden, it was something that was a joy to him. So I love David. So I could do a whole episode just on David. And
I know, right?
Yeah, that was so, and seeing Darrell be like, "Oh, wow, this means this really is." I think that was the moment
Yes.
Darrell realized, "Okay, these are my dads. This
Right.
is."
Oh my gosh. Yes. When the the times over and over again when you hear, Darrell is acting like this because he thinks I'm going to enjoy this while I can before they send me back, because that's happened to them so many
Mhm.
times. And to have those constant reassurances of them, showing up for him at his concert, and um still keeping him around even though he drove the SUV, and all of these things. It's like, I'm doing all of this and they're not sending me back, and then but that prayer just really sealed it.
Yeah, and I think that sealed it, especially with David, and you could tell that, we'll get to Keith, and I think they had, I think it was harder for them to accept that Keith was gonna be okay, especially for Darrell, especially. And then I think with Keith, it was when Darrell's like, "Well, I don't wanna go to the ocean. I don't wanna go swimming. I wanna go snowboarding." And it's this pushing thing of saying, like, he's doing that because he's like, "Oh, yeah, you don't really mean that. You're not really gonna take us on vacations." And then with Keith saying, "Well, we'll do that too." And then
Yeah.
Darrell going, "Oh, okay." Because when Anthony said, "Well, what are you gonna do with us when you go?" I was like,
Oh
"Oh
my god, my
god."
heart. Sorry, I just hiccuped. I'm so
Oh,
sorry.
that's okay.
But
Anthony
yeah.
just, oh, both of them, I just,
Oh
oh,
my god.
and when Anthony was so scared at the hospital,
Yes. When
and I'm
he
like,
when
"David, why can't you see what's going
I
on?"
know, right?
I'm like, "David, you're so sensitive, but you're not seeing what's going on. Why aren't you seeing that, of course he's gonna be scared."
Exactly. And when Darrell keeps saying, "Well, you never asked," and it's not the kind of thing it's so specific that nobody would really think to ask. "Oh, sweetie, are you scared because your mom OD'd so many times?"
Yeah.
But he's really making them see. Oh God, there was something that Darrell said that was hilarious. Oh, when they found the porn under the bed, and David's like, "We kept that in a locked storage thing, wrapped up in towels under the bed." Because they had been like, "Where did you get this?" And Daryl's like, "Well, now you know where I found it."
That was funny. And then when David's like, "Hey, we gotta go get rid of all this porn," and they're going to go throw all the porn away, and Keith's like, "We're keeping this one." That's funny. That was so funny. But yes, I love David anyway. And as you can tell, listeners, this episode, because we have a lot more to cover, I prepared myself that this episode would be longer. Of course, that's also because I happen to love this show so much, and I haven't
Oh,
been able
so
to.
the first part is me being in it. The second part is because you love the show so much.
Yeah, yes, but I do love this show. So anyway, okay. Well, now we'll get to the the lovely Chenoweth family. So there, of course, is Brenda, who we first meet Brenda when she hooks up with Nate. Um, they meet on an airplane and then they hook up there at the airport. So yeah. And then Brenda has a brother who is so healthy, Billy, who has bipolar disorder. And she was raised by two wonderful, just kidding, horrible parents. Who, of course, you have Margaret Chenoweth, played by Joanna Cassidy. I'm just pointing that because she's just known for that, she's been around forever. And then you have where's his name? Why I just Bernard Chenoweth, who was their father, who dies in season 4. No, season 3. Sorry, season 3. And yeah, so and they were psychiatrists, and Brenda was like, they basically treated her like a test subject and wrote book about her, and they're a very dysfunctional family. So yeah. So what are your thoughts on this family? And then who's your favorite, if you have a favorite? I don't
Right?
know.
Okay. Um, well, first, one thing that I forgot to say about Lisa is that normally I hate when shows kill off a woman character for man pain or whatever. But I think in this show it was done well, and it wasn't just a man pain thing.
I
Um,
agree.
and especially because her presence, just, we get her back so many times in little, mental images. but also her presence is continuously felt throughout the remainder of the show. But yeah, okay, so now that I have to talk about the Shenwas, I guess. All right. Okay, so here we go. I'm gonna go from most horrible to least horrible, even though they're all horrible. I'm gonna start with
So glad we
Margaret.
agree on this. I'm oh, sorry, go ahead. Sorry.
Margaret is the absolute worst. She treats her children like afterthoughts, and they only come into play in her mind when she wants them as accessories. When she wants to feel like a mom, she'll suddenly drop by or show up. She doesn't really love them. I don't think she loves them. I think that she had them, and therefore she is their mother, and that's about it. Like, she doesn't really have a maternal feeling towards them. She treats them both like living experiments, like they're continuously there to be screwed with, and she screws with them constantly. She's constantly manipulating them, constantly meddling in ways that to her are interesting, not helpful, not anything. She's like, huh, I wonder what would happen if I pushed this button today. And that's all that there is with her. And it's absolutely awful. And it's even worse than, and I'll get to her husband in a bit, even worse than the way that her husband treats them, because she's actively inflicting pain for the sake of inflicting pain.
She gets off
Um,
on it.
she does. She really does. Next on the horribleness scale is Brenda. And Brenda, she is the thing that she and Nate have in common is that they're both very selfish. Like, that's the easiest way to segue into that. They're both very selfish people. But her selfishness in part stems from her sense of superiority above everybody else. She thinks that she's the smartest person in the room. She will continuously tell you that she's the smartest person in the room. And no matter what, she has to always be right. She always has to have the upper hand. Um, she doesn't do it as much in seasons 4 and 5, but she manipulates the hell out of Nate. She's just really, she screws with him so much, and she does it also to the family whenever she can. And it's the same cruelty that her mother has, where she'll do things to be like, oh, interesting, now what if I do this?
Yep.
What reaction can I get out of you if I say this, if I do this? So as much as she and Nate were compatible because of their there were just a lot of things that made them compatible, but ultimately it's a compatibility that was also toxic. Um, they're two sides of the same coin, and that's why they work so well together, and it's also why they don't work well at all. And like I said, with Nate, yeah, like, oh, it seemed like he might have had a happier future with Maggie, but he always seems to have had a happier future ahead of him with anybody until he decides that he doesn't. And I guarantee you, if he had survived and gone off with Maggie, he would have eventually cheated on Maggie with Brenda, because that's his default. He will always come back to Brenda, because they are just so similar. But Brenda is, I think, especially selfish and self-involved. Um, Even when we see that awful fantasy where she is, where her inner Nate, which anytime that any of these dead people appear, they're just telling you things that you think to yourself that you don't want to say to yourself. You want to have somebody else say them. So when Nate tells her, you know what, why don't you go off with Billy and you guys can screw and get married? And she actually entertains that thought to the point where she has a fantasy about, yeah, I know, it's so
That
disgusting.
scene was so,
Yeah, but it's all about Brenda and her, whatever. And thankfully, she wakes up disgusted about it. But just everything is like a what if, like a what if I did this to this person. And like I said, she got better about it in the last couple of seasons. But I think that's more because she did eventually say, okay, I need to see somebody about my issues, and she went, and and she approached it in a very Brenda way, which is, I'm going to be the best at therapy. I'm going to be like the best patient ever. And then she's like, okay, all these therapists are clearly not as good as I could be. So she decides to become a therapist herself. And all of it is wrapped up in a sense of superiority. Like when she's, I forget where she was, and she was saying something like, well, yeah, I know this, but I can do better than you can. So why don't you just, scoot out of the way and let me do this.
Yeah.
And, um, I I was like, I kind of hope she doesn't end up raising these girls, but she does, and God knows how they turned out. Maybe they didn't show up on screen because they like got tired of her and left and never came back. Like they're both like, sis, do you see how our mother is just grossly self-involved and how she's exactly like grandma, even though she won't say she's exactly like grandma? Yes, sis, I see that. Do you want to get out of here and maybe find a more healthy environment for us? Yes, I do. Let's go somewhere that is not here. Like that's my take on that. But I there was never even a point where I really wanted to like Brenda. She never lent herself to be likable, and I think that that's also a good thing, because I don't think that you need to like every character, and you certainly don't need to like every female character. um but I also wonder what it says about the writing room, that they wrote somebody this horrible who was the main love interest of their favorite character.
Though I will say really quick, and I'm really glad you don't like her, because I hate this character, but spoiler. But she actually was very beloved by people that liked the show. When this show was out, people really loved this character. So just throwing that. Sorry. Sorry, just want to throw that in there because I just think it's interesting, because I agree with what you're saying about it.
Yeah. No, but I wonder like how the writers felt
Yeah.
about her, because they have this worshipful way of writing Nate, and then this really hateful and gross way of writing Brenda. So it's very interesting to me, because especially because, like I said, they're the opposite sides of the same coin. So next on the horribleness scale is Billy. And the thing is, yes, Billy has bipolar, and but at the same time, like, that's not an excuse for a lot of his behavior, because even when he is medicated, he's still pretty self-involved. Um, but I think because of his mother's meddling with them, and because of Brenda's being so into herself, um, and his wanting to be an artist with depth and vision and all of this, his going off of the medication, um, when he feels like he needs inspiration, I think it's a theme that comes up a lot in film and TV. I don't know if it comes up a lot in real life, because I just don't know that.
I'll
But
talk about it.
okay. No, yeah, please do. But it's something that he seems to do when he wants to really feel his feelings, which is understandable. But at the same time, like, when he's off the medication, he goes to such violent extremes and such dangerous extremes that it's just not good or healthy for anybody, including him. Um, but he is less horrible than his mother and sister, because a lot of it is, I think, coping behavior, and just his feelings for Brenda are really gross, but also because Brenda wants to be the center of attention of everybody. I think she kind of feeds into that, whether or not she realizes or will admit to that. Byrne is the least horrible because he dies early. The end.
The end. Yeah. Okay, I hate this family, and I really hate Brenda. I'll do the same thing that Carla did, and actually, it's going to be the exact same order as Carla. So, yes, the mother, Margaret, she should have never had children. She never wanted to have
Amen.
children. Yeah, she just either she just got stuck with having children, or she felt like that's what she had to do, and she would do that, and she could find a way to experiment on them as a psychologist. And it's really gross and icky, because especially ethically, you should never do that. And I think she also really loved the fact that she had a mentally ill son, because the fact that she had a mentally ill son, she could do even more experimenting and even more pushing. And while I think it's Billy and Brenda's relationship is very disturbing and very hard to watch and very uncomfortable, even though I'm not saying this like I think they like I would never like ship them or anything. I'm not saying that like this thing, but I think it makes perfect sense that that's what happened, because it was kind of like it was always intended. Like, I think even their parents, especially the mom, wanted that to happen, which is so even
Yes.
makes it even more disturbing. And yes, Brenda tries to push that away, but she also plays into it. Like you were saying, Carla, she plays into this. She loves having this broken brother that she can fix. And they also have this whole thing with the Nathaniel and what was the other Nathaniel and the two children's characters that they're following all the time. That's why she has got the Nathaniel tattoo on her back.
Oh,
And
Nathaniel and Isabel.
thank you. I was like, what was the girl's name? That's actually one of my favorite names is Isabel. So I'm surprised I didn't remember it. But anyway, but that whole thing and that whole dynamic and growing up, and they were growing up. Basically, it's a lot like Flowers in the Attic. I will say, in a way, that
Mhm.
sibling dynamic where they are forced to be each other's world. And and Brenda is just, oh my gosh, I do think, even though I hate Brenda, I do think the last few episodes she kind of is a little bit better, a little bit. And I did feel for her, and I felt for her psyche with her being tormented by Nate's ghost. I felt for her a lot, but I still don't like her. She's just a very unlikable person. She is so self-absorbed, and she gets off on hurting other people in a way. I think she's kind of like her mother in some respects, even though she thinks she's not. And yeah, she thinks she's better than everybody. And I love the scene when she like befriends, she starts working at that therapy at that clinic that's like kind of like, I guess it's a free clinic where people are coming in, and that woman that she befriends, and she's like complaining about Nate and their relationship, and she's like, just shut up. Shut up. I can't deal with this anymore. I nearly laughed this time when I watched that, because I'm like, finally someone is telling her to shut up, because it's true. She's so self-absorbed. And when she meets Justin Theroux's character in season 3, when she's like, because she was a sex addict, and she was dealing with sex addiction, and in season 2 she was doing all these very dangerous things sexually, and it was because she was bored with Nate, and also it's just because she's got so much trauma she's never dealt with and all that stuff. And so when she comes back and her father has died, and she's trying to, she's trying not to smoke pot, she's trying to not have sex with people, even though she ends up having an affair with Nate and all this. And she meets her neighbor, Justin Theroux, who I absolutely love Justin Theroux in this series. I just,
I don't usually care for him, but I really like Joe.
I really liked him. I thought he was really interesting. And then you watch her be like, and again, she's being so superior when he's like, well, I'm into BDSM and I'm into that stuff and I want to be a sub and all that. And she's immediately like, well, that's not normal. I don't want to do that. I wanted to have normal vanilla
I
relationships.
know.
I'm like,
Oh
what
my
the
god, the
hell, dude?
hypocrisy.
I
The
know.
hypocrisy here.
And like, you can't have a normal relationship with someone who's into that stuff. And then she ends up doing it. And I will say, with the exception of the way Brenda was, although I think it was more Brenda, not necessarily the showrunners, I did appreciate the way they handled that part of that character, and when they never made him a weirdo because of it. It was just
Yes.
something he was into, because I actually think they handled that very well. And I like that he was very open about it and talked about it, and he wasn't ashamed of it.
I really
And I
liked
liked
that
that.
he ran through the courtyard butt naked.
Oh yeah, I liked that too.
I just for scenic reasons.
I liked that too. Yes, yes. And I liked that they showed a man in the submissive role, because you very rarely see that when it's BDSM relationships. So I did appreciate that too, because that does exist, people. So I liked that, and I liked that even though she was like, well, that means we're not gonna have a normal relationship. He was like, no, this is just part of who I am, but I'm still somebody who he wanted this life that he wanted a family and he wanted to settle down and he wanted the house and he wanted to marry her and all that kind of stuff. And she, the whole time, she's playing with his emotions and using him. And she doesn't give a crap about that because she wants Nate at that time, even though she's going to end up getting bored with Nate eventually too, because everything's about Brenda. And the thing with Brenda and Billy's relationship, so I'll get to Billy next, is even though she says, that's very unhealthy, and when Billy tries to kiss her, and which is, oh my God,
I know, so gross.
but it
Oh,
makes sense. I hate that it makes
yeah.
sense, but it makes sense. But during that, and when she's all disgusted about it, a part of me is like, well, you actually egg this whole thing on because you like having Billy there to take care of. Because if you don't have Billy to take care of, you can't be superior to someone who's actually smart too, kind of thing. Like she feels superior to Billy too. And I do want to say, I know there are people with bipolar that are like this. And when they go off their meds, they're like this. But I really, watching it now, and I realize, this is, it's almost 20 years ago, whatever. I'm really kind of sick of seeing people who have bipolar being depicted as people that are just like totally depraved in some sort of fashion. And I don't personally, I don't appreciate it as someone who has bipolar disorder. I mean, and granted, I have bipolar 2, which is different than bipolar 1, which Billy clearly has bipolar 1. Someday we'll go over the differences. If you don't know what they are, go Google it. The biggest difference is you don't have hallucinations ever. You have bipolar 2, and you might only have one like hypomanic phase in your life, but bipolar 2 has more depression than anything, heavy depressive states. But anyway, that aside, it just bothers me that has to be the only portrayal we see of bipolar disorder, when I mean, you can just look at people that are famous actors or creative people who have done a whole career, and yes, they've had falling down and falling up, and but they're not like horrible, disgusting people all the time, or they're not always violent, because most
Right.
people with mental illness, they're going to have more violence perpetrated on them than the other way around. With the medication, I've been on and off medication my whole life. I've been on medication where I've been deadened and like spent a whole summer just lying on a bed in a basement when I was a teenager. That's totally horrible. That was not fun. I've been on medication where you are very heavy drugged feeling. I take medication now that is like, it's very hard to find medication that works. And once you're on it, it's the medication I take is like a lifesaver for me. It's the best thing that's ever happened to me in my life as far as that side goes, because it's the first thing where I haven't felt like, yes, you have a week where you have to deal with horrible side effects, awful side effects, but then as long as it's one that works, usually they, talk to your doctor, of course. I'm not giving you medical advice, but I'm just saying once you get to that, then it can be a relief. And then if you do stop taking it, it's very dangerous to stop taking medication and to just stop it, because not only because of your mental health, but your physical, because you've gotten so dependent on it, you'll have physical reactions. It can be life threatening. I just want to say that. So please consult your doctors. But the whole myth of not being able to create while you're on medication, it is a myth. I'm not saying there aren't medications that can deaden your brain, but when you found one that's actually working, I can still be creative. I am still a creative person on my medication. So that whole myth that Billy lives in is something that he's told himself. I don't think
Mm.
it's something that's actually accurate. Even though he has that time with his friends where they're like, well, he's not himself. He would have done crazy things before. And there is that side that's very accurate when you have bipolar. And if you've been in a state where you are more in a manic phase, or you're more in that I'm just going to go out and do something crazy phase, you will have friends that only like you in that phase. And this has happened to me a lot. And then when you're out of that, they're all gone because they don't, that's the only reason they were hanging out with you in the first place. And so there is that part. So I understand that. I think there was a part of him that was deadened by that, but I also think it's a myth that he was telling himself, and that I think he thought he was more creative without the medication, but I think he could have been creative on the medication. I just don't think he was giving it enough chance or enough faith in himself. And I think he also grew up in such a fucked up environment that was kind of bred into him that it's better to be quote unquote crazy than it is to not be. And so I think he fed into that, made it worse. I'm not at all excusing anything he did because I thought he was a horrible, awful, abusive person, very abusive,
Yes.
very dangerous person. And I'm so grateful because I thought he was going to sexually assault Claire. And I'm
Me
so
too.
grateful that didn't happen again. I was worried about it the first time and worried about it again the second time, even though I knew it was going to happen. But I'm so grateful that didn't happen. So I'm not excusing anything he did, but I think it was sort of he was just brought up with this thing. It's better to be off your meds, and that's where your creativity comes from. And I think he was told that because the reason he was a good photographer is because he was mentally ill, and that's not why. And so it's another trope that we should get rid of too, is the tortured genius artist. Okay. So another thing that they play into with that one too. So yeah. And then I don't have anything else to add with the dad. Ditto what Carla said. Yep. He died early. So that's why he was the least.
Good riddance.
Good riddance. Who cares? Anyway, yes, this episode is going to be so dang long. That's okay. Okay.
It's gonna be so dang good.
Yeah, yes, exactly. Yes.
More
I meant that in a
importantly.
good way. Yes. I meant that. In a good way. Okay. So now let's get to Keith. And then we can also talk about Keith's family too, like his parents, especially his dad was physically abusive. And so we can talk about that as well. And his sister is a drug addict and his dealing with that. Keith, when we first meet Keith, is a cop. He later loses his job after he beats up a wife abuser. And frankly, I was glad when Keith stopped being a cop. And then he becomes like a security for a spoiled pop star played by the same actress. Why is her name?
Michelle
That played,
Trachtenberg.
thank you. That played Dawn in Buffy. And then he becomes a personal bodyguard to a horrible, awful person who works in Hollywood. But anyway, he has been David's on and off boyfriend. They eventually, you see, get married and they adopt two amazing boys as well. But they have an on and off relationship. And I do want to just recommend, and I should have sent this article to Carla, but I do want to recommend an article. And also you can Google and find, there's so many articles about Keith and David's relationship. But there is one that's in the, what's this site? 25 years later site.com is what, I don't know. I'll send you the, but it's by Andrew Grievous and it's called How 6 Feet Under's Keith and David Broke Barriers for LGBTQ Couples on TV. And I do recommend reading that. I'm not going to read much of it just because of time, but I do recommend reading that because it was interesting to read this take on this relationship where they said it was very nice to see an actual relationship between two gay men where it was an actual relationship and it wasn't just focused on sex. And yes, they end up having a little bit of an open relationship at one point, but they've been saying here that was not done as a salacious thing. It was done as a way of them exploring their relationship and how their relationship worked. So, Carla, what are your overall thoughts on Keith? And then you could also talk about his family too, but I just wanted to highlight Keith.
You know, I really loved Keith. There were times when I was so frustrated at him, times when I just flat out didn't like him, times when I was like, David, get as far away from this man as you can. Because he did at some points get abusive towards David.
Mhm.
And it made me, because again, David ends up just getting crap and taking it because he feels like, well, this is just my life. This is just my lot in life. And this is the same person who the whole first season is telling David, you deserve better. You need to come out so that you can just be your whole self. And then David comes out and Keith is frustrated because he's not the same repressed man that he fell in love with. And it takes a while for Keith to come around to the notion that everything that you saw in David is there, but your perception of David has changed because David is not being the doormat that he was in the beginning, including with you. I think a lot of season 2 was David kind of begging after Keith and trying to conform to whatever Keith wanted, and basically cowering in front of Keith because Keith was very volatile.
Mhm.
And I never really liked the excuse that, oh, it's because he had such an abusive childhood. Which, yes, if somebody has an abusive childhood, there's a very solid chance that they will be an abusive person in one way or another, even if they acknowledge that they had an abusive childhood, even if they take um, some steps to address it in their own lives. But the the way that Keith handles things kind of mirrors the way that David did, where he would repress things and then they would just come out in the most horrible ways.
Mhm.
When he shoots that one guy and it's like, oh, it's a good death. It's like it's a clean death, like whatever. And yes, the guy was armed, absolutely, whatever. But he still just shot the guy as he turned around. Like he didn't even have a moment to talk him down. Or there was none of that. It was just like, oh no, gun, shoot. So, and of course um, that carries a lot more weight now in 2022 when we have had so much more graphic video evidence of police murdering people in the line of duty. And when he attacks the domestic abuser, it's it was in a way it was even more graphic and shocking than when he shot the guy, because it takes a lot more intent, because you're physically moving towards this person, physically hitting this person repeatedly with your body, as opposed to standing at some distance with a piece of metal.
Mhm.
And I was like you, I was very glad when he was fired, because I just really thought that, okay, I don't want this man to be a cop. I want
Yeah.
to like him, and him being a cop doesn't really sit well with me. And I thought it was really funny that at the beginning, um, during Nathaniel Senior's um, memorial service, that they're like, "You're friends with a cop," and I just wanted to know where that came from, because like
Oh,
they
yeah, that's true. That's
I
true.
was I was waiting to see like some kind of thing where like they had some bad blood with like the police department or something like that. It was just like this weird thing where these like random white people are like, "You're friends with a cop?" Like
Yeah,
I didn't understand. I
you're
did
right.
not.
That was weird. That was weird.
It was so odd. I'm like, what the hell? But fine, okay, like we'll roll with it. Um, and then he loses his job. He gets very down on himself, very as he kind of spirals a little bit there in those middle seasons. You see like a really ugly version of him. And yes, you have the episode where they go to his family's and his father is just awful. And when he tells David, um stay out of this, this is a family matter, and David takes it so hard, like, wow, you don't consider me family, okay. But I think in a sense it's also Keith being like, my family is awful, like me saying you're not, that this is a family thing. It's like it's not a good thing for you to be considered part of this family. um but still, it's got to sting to hear that, especially with no information and no follow through, I mean, no follow up about it. And I'm like, listen, babe, this is what's happening. This is why. It's just like, man, figure it out from the context, which is a lot of what Keith does. It's like he says these things, and David's just expected to kind of figure it out, which in a way it's just very relatable. I think a lot of there aren't a lot of relationships, I don't know, like statistically, I'm not going to sit here and give you numbers, but I think that the communication is such a big reason why so many relationships fail, where people aren't clear in their needs and in their motives. And so the other partner is forced to infer, and it's usually not a favorable inference. So a lot of where they fall apart is in their communication and their communication style being so hostile. When even when they're in therapy, they're pretty hostile with each other. They can't
Mhm.
progress because they're just so mean and aggressive. And they start communicating through sex. And Keith is really the one who kind of um, eases them into this and really starts bringing a third into the relationship. And when they decide to kind of be open, all of the quote unquote rules are very much subject to interpretation by both of them, but I think especially by Keith. Keith is like, well, is it really that bad
Yeah.
that I did this? Is it really that bad that I did that? Um, and it's very often that David feels abandoned by Keith, even when they are in a relationship, even when they are living together. And I think when David goes through what he goes through with the kidnap, um, Keith is there for him, and I think that that's really the point where he starts to change in the way that he relates to David when it's in the aftermath when he's like, okay, David is never really going to say I'm not okay. Like I have to figure out, no, he's not okay. I have to do these things because David wants to be so solid for everybody else. I have to be solid for him so that he can break down. And
Mhm.
this happens again when Nate dies, when he has now had this experience with David, so now he understands what David needs and is able to step up and be and do what David needs, including telling David, you can't live here until you're more centered, which is the best thing that he could tell David at that moment. Because it wasn't just them, it's also these two little boys who have had a very tumultuous, horrible life who don't need to be exposed to this with their new family. So Keith gets a really nice redemption arc
Mm.
in that sense where he really begins to step up for David. And this is, you know, I, I I do believe that people are capable of change and of becoming better if they acknowledge what they've done and if they put in the work. And Keith is a prime example of that. He went from being somebody who I was not comfortable leaving my sweet baby David with to being somebody who was like, this is the person for him. This is the person who understands him. Like you said, he is the one in the show who truly gets him. He's the only one who really sees all of the sides of David, because David has to be so strong for his family. Otherwise, they have nobody strong. And we didn't really talk about Nathaniel Sr.,
Oh yeah, we did
but
really.
but Nathaniel Sr., you get the sense that he wasn't really the strong person for his family that they kind of needed him to be. And it felt a lot like David stepped into that role early, even when Nathaniel was alive. Um, so them having David and Keith having the relationship roller coaster that they did makes sense, because David had never had an opportunity to be soft and to be weak until Keith kind of forced him into it.
Mhm.
So I really like him. I appreciate the character. I there was a point at which I was kind of hoping that they would end up adopting Keith's niece, and of
Me
course,
too.
right.
Me
And
too.
can I
Oh
just
my
say, like,
gosh.
it
Oh
really
my
bothered me.
gosh.
It really bothered me that the first time that they show his niece, she's a sweet little girl, very excited about getting her easy bake oven. And the next episode, she's cursing up and down and being like really rude and everything. And I think that's just how people tend to write Black characters. It's just like, well, I don't know what to do with her. We're going to have her more episodes, more episodes. What do we do with her? She's going to have to curse, I guess, and be really rude. And her mom's going to be a drug addict. And, like all of these. And this is also why I resent Keith having died the way that he did. Everybody else got to die of natural causes. He's the only person who gets shot. And that to me is just an exacerbation of the way that Black life is portrayed on television, that it has to be violent and it has to be nonsensical and gory for it to work on TV. But that's the writer's fault. And I just the actor was so good. He really, like, in that first season when everybody is all superficial impressions, and you haven't really gotten to the core of who they are. He is this, calming presence, this reasonable person. You can't understand how anything could ever be wrong about Keith. And then you get to season 2 and you're like, okay, I see it now.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah. Yeah, that and they have great chemistry too. They have really amazing chemistry together. They're really, yeah, I really like watching them together. And
Of all the couples, they have the best chemistry.
I
They
agree.
really feel like they could be an actual couple
Mm.
because they just flow in and out of each other's space so well.
Yeah, they're very natural together. It's just they fit.
Yes.
Even when like they're holding hands, it's like this even that fits in this way, which I don't know if that makes sense, but yeah, it's like they just make sense. It's like puzzle pieces coming together in the way that they are in the show. But I agree completely. There were times when I was like, "Oh my gosh, David, you have to just go away and leave this man." And there were times where you are on the edge of your seat worried that he is going to become violent with David. There were a few instances of that, and David even says that to him at one point. I'm always worried. I don't know, when you're going to snap. I'm afraid of you. He says, I'm afraid of you. And
Hmm.
I think that was a real wake up call for Keith in a lot of respects too. Um, and I think it's interesting when they started going to couples therapy, which, like you said, Carla, they didn't really do that too well. But when
No.
they started going to couples therapy, and then there was the one time when David couldn't make the appointment, and so Keith was there alone with the therapist. And the therapist is like, "Have you ever thought of just going to therapy yourself?" And I really wish they had explored that more because I think Keith
Yes.
really did deserve to have therapy. I like to use the word deserve instead of need therapy. I think when you say deserve, it's because I think therapy is something that if it's in a proper environment, you find a right therapist, is like something that you deserve. It's not like something you need. It's something you deserve, that you should honor your soul. You're worthy enough for therapy is what I mean. And I think Keith deserved to have more of that. And I wish they had explored that more. And I wish we could have seen Keith healing from his own childhood, from his own trauma, from dealing with a father that you can also tell was not accepting of his sexuality. You can
Hmm.
tell there was a lot of anger from his father over that. Um, and there was all that pent up anger with Keith. And so when he was a cop, I think he was kind of like using that job as a way of, which is not good, of expressing that anger and that volatile nature. And so, when he does beat up that wife abuser, it is a lot harder to watch than, I mean, they're both bad, but a lot harder to watch than when he shot the guy and killed him, because he was so out of control, and that was all about inflicting pain on somebody, inflicting his pain on somebody, and there was no controlling him, and he could have killed the person. It wasn't like he was even, it was just so physical and so right there, and so just skin on skin kind of attack of violence there. But I think Keith, underneath it all, Keith is a very, very sensitive human being. He's actually incredibly sensitive. That's why I just wish they would have, explored that therapy thing more. But he's got this real heart in there. And I think David is the first person that he's let see that side of himself. Even see when you see him with another relationship, in between,
Mm-hmm.
and you don't see that same thing with that. With David, he can become a little bit more of that. He can show a little bit more of that sensitive side, because I think forever he's been like, I've got to be this strong, tough guy, and I've got to look really strong and tough, especially when he's dealing with a sister who is a drug addict, and he's dealing with a volatile father. And you don't know if there had been times maybe when he had taken the brunt of the violence to spare his sister or even to spare his mother. You don't know if that happened too. And so I think he's always had to be so strong. And and I do want to say, I really also appreciated about Keith is Keith and they did this. He wasn't a stereotypical gay man. It wasn't like they made any of them like stereotypes that you would normally see. And I appreciated that a lot. And they were very intimate with each other in lots of different ways that weren't just about sex.
Yes.
And that's very crucial, especially in that time period. That was ahead of its time, because you did not see gay relationships between men where if they were showing the physical side, it wasn't just all about sex. And with them, it was about this intimacy where for both of them, they were showing a side of themselves that they didn't show anybody else. And Keith was showing this side of himself to David that he hadn't shown anyone else. And I think Keith always wanted to be a dad, but I don't think Keith would have ever become a dad if he hadn't had David in his life, because I don't think he felt he deserved to be a dad because of his history. And so
You hit it on the head. Yeah.
once he had David there, and David's like, no, you deserve to be a dad, without saying those exact words, but he said, no, you deserve to be a dad. And then when he finally meets these two boys who, I think Keith's whole thing was he wanted it to be biological and he wanted it to be part of him. And when that falls apart, and then trying to accept in his mind that it's okay to adopt these two boys, I think that was a real struggle for Keith, because I think Keith felt like even he was already struggling with the fact of feeling he deserved to be a dad. So I think he felt like if he wasn't starting from a baby on up, that he was going to fail at this, especially when he has two children who have come from a very, very horrible home life. And so he has to deal with that. And that was probably triggering stuff in Keith's past. And so he's like, well, I'm going to screw this up. So I'm just going to start at 10 and
Yeah.
then my way down. And I liked watching him go and watch Darrell's performance. I liked that he went too. It wasn't just David. And the fact that when he said, well, we'll go snowboarding too. And the fact that even though he was furious with Darrell for stealing the car, and of course, who wouldn't be? But when he realizes the whole part of that, which he already knew, but when he accepts that and really becomes a really, really good father, he's a really good father. And you see him soften those edges a bit and be like, it's okay to be soft. And you really see that. I was going to mention what you mentioned, Carla, when you watch him comforting and taking care of David after Nate dies. And that was the most caring we had ever seen from Keith. And there was never a moment of because Keith and David fought a lot, yelled at each other a lot. And there was never that at all. And he did say, you are scaring our children. You cannot stay here. And that to me was like, oh, whew, finally you that wall that you have has broken down. And you're finally not only are you letting your heart out, but you're also like, oh yeah, I can be a dad without David there. I can be the dad. I can be the caregiver. I can be the sensitive one. He's always sensitive, but I can be openly sensitive. So I think that was essential too. Yeah.
That moment when Anthony is sitting at the little breakfast nook, and he's telling Keith that the reason that Darrell acts out so much is because they've been to so many foster homes and he just wants to have as much fun in a safe place while he can. And that's when Keith really gets Darrell's behavior, and he just kind of sits back like, oh my God. And he takes that in and he really acts on it. And I think that that's part of what makes him so great, is that he doesn't brush it aside. He doesn't say, oh, that's just an excuse. He's like, oh, wow, these kids have really been through something that I have the power to help them have better lives. It just, it's one of those moments in the show that just melted my heart and just made me want to sob, because I was like, these babies, and Keith, he gets it now. I think he really gets it.
Yeah, no, I totally, that's why. And I liked watching Keith's journey. I liked that we got to know Keith, and it wasn't just like Keith was just some guy that David dated. And it was about both of them. And it was also about Keith individually. You got episodes that were centered around, that there were moments centered around Keith, and watching that and watching him grow and watching him have, like you said, like a redemption arc and a healing. I still wish we would have gotten the therapy thing, but still having a healing time there and becoming a great father. And I do agree, the death, and watching it earlier today, and I'm like, seriously, did you really need to do that? It would have been nice. What I would have liked to have seen is if they both David and Keith would have, like, because I think this would have made sense. I think they would have been one of those couples that one dies and then like 2 days later the other one dies, or they die
Mhm.
together, almost, of natural causes, not of anything
Right.
violent, of natural causes. I mean, Keith deserved to have a better death. Keith deserved a better
Yes.
death than he was given, and I agree. I was like, seriously,
Like, it made me really angry because it's just, oh, okay, he's black, so let's find a gun to kill him with.
I know. I'm like, Keith deserved better. He deserved a
Mhm.
lot better than that. But yeah, and the performance was incredible.
Yes.
I already said that, but I'm saying it again. It's like and their chemistry was. I ship them. I had times when I had struggled with it, but I do ship them, and I wish we could have actually. We did see their wedding, but I wish we could have actually, like, heard their vows and stuff.
Yeah.
Just
With
because
the
we were on such
boys
a
there and oh my
yeah, because we
god.
were on such a big journey with them, and
Mhm.
so yeah, yeah. Okay, well, now let's get to the Diaz family, which is Rico. And then, sorry, I've got to get up the names of his children and this trivia because Freddie Rodriguez's son, Giancarlo Rodriguez, plays Rico's on screen son, Julio. Sorry. So I wanted to make
Oh,
sure you, because I didn't know that until,
me
until today.
neither.
Until
Oh my
today when I was looking
god.
up trivia. But let me just make sure I get all the, because there's also the sister. So, which, sorry, everybody. We don't have anybody watching us right now, but if you turn in later, I apologize because this is me not having everything up, because I usually pull this up like when Carla's talking. I'll usually pull up the other thing. Um, sorry, everyone. Do 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 do. This is why editing is nice, because then I'll just like edit this all out. Come on, why aren't you pulling this up? Okay, here's the wiki. Well, of course, his wife Vanessa. Um,
Played by Justina
seriously,
Machado,
yes.
who
Seriously,
was
are they
on
not?
One Day at a Time.
Yes, which we talked about earlier this year, and her character on One Day at a Time also dealing with depression, and of course, her character on here deals with it in a more extreme way, but deals with that too. And how are they not listing on here her sister's name? How are they not?
Angelica.
Thank you. I was like, I couldn't. And then also Augusto is her other son as well. So they have two sons. And yes. So what are your overall thoughts on the Diaz family? And then who's your favorite?
I really wanted to just love Rico with no complications because the whole Latina solidarity thing. I was like, yeah, there's Latina representation in the show, fantastic. But the guy is so there's so much machismo and there's homophobia and there's also just this callousness in him. That's evident from the very beginning. The way that I think David is right to want the room where they prep the bodies to be a respectful place because these are people's relatives. I know that
Yeah.
they're just like empty vessels at this point, but they still deserve some measure of respect. And Rico he doesn't get it. And in the beginning, you attribute it to the fact that he's so young and that he is um he's basically a kid. He even looks like a kid. It's
He does look like a kid.
And it's not until like when he finds out, especially when he finds out that David is gay, and he is so homophobic, and that doesn't change. He tolerates David because they're business partners, but he doesn't really he loves Nate, but I don't think he loves David, and I think it all comes down to that. And again, like there's a lot of headbutting between Rico and David, and there's some part of it to David that I think might be some racism, and there's some of it with Rico that I think is just his homophobia. So they can't really see eye to eye because they're just so dismissive of each other, and there's a part of them that hates the other person because of this, and it really doesn't make for a good environment for everybody. But I also think that Rico gets stepped on a lot and he gets treated like crap by the whole family. Maybe not Claire. I don't think Claire really has much dealing with Rico, but I just really think that Rico doesn't get a fair shake a lot from the Fishers. So um it was a relief to me when he decided to pursue his own
Yeah.
business venture, because I thought, he's very talented. He's gotten a lot better at the actual funeral director part of it, because at first he was a mess. He sucked at it. Oh my god.
Yes, he did.
Like, good lord, who wants to deal with this person who is openly sneering at you for your families, for your decisions? Um he has a problem with anybody who is not Christian. He has a problem with anybody who wants to do things a different way. Whereas David just steps in smoothly, and just he reads up on other cultures and their traditions, and he's just very accepting of and respectful of people's wishes. And Rico, honestly, a lot of the times he just couldn't care less. He's just like, well, it's not the way that I'm used to. This is not okay. It's like whenever he comes up from his little basement hidey hole, he comes up just to be a total jerk. So I think it's a very smart decision to have his wife handle the people,
Yes.
because he sucks with people. He just does. Um, and the whole handling of Latina characters in the show really bothered me, because you have Vanessa, who there were so many opportunities to really write these characters with depth. You have Vanessa, who is a loving wife and a wonderful mother, and she works really hard, and Rico works really hard. And by the way that Rico works really hard, and he's basically keeping this operation running because the brothers are constantly going off and having these little hijinks and adventures,
Yep.
and he's the only one still working, and constantly he's like, well, I guess I'll do it. I guess I'll do it. It's very true to how people treat minorities in workplaces, where it's like, well, yes, I know that you're highly skilled and your talent is coveted, so I'm gonna give you like a 2% raise. There you go, to show my appreciation, like that kind of thing.
Mhm.
Where it's, oh my god. But Vanessa also works very hard, and she's um, such a loving person, and I think that she's a really strong person. And the whole angle of her depression, I thought, would have been really fascinating to explore, but they did it in such a way um, that it only served Rico's storyline,
Mhm.
especially as a way to push him into infidelity. And it was just really gross. I thought, like, all of the seasons after season one with the Diaz family were handled really poorly. You have Sophia, the stripper, who is, the Latina bombshell with like the big boobs and the big hair and the histrionic personality, and she is like the seductive Latina woman who's going to steal your men. And as when Vanessa goes to confront her, they have like this big, loud, punching, drag out fight, and Vanessa and her sister um, basically like destroy Sophia's car. And all of it's like, oh, these fiery Latinas, you know how they are. They're gonna pull your hair, they're gonna like bust down your car. It's really an embarrassment, I think, on the writer's part, that this is the best that they could come up with for Vanessa. Especially because I think Vanessa was such an interesting character, or could have been in better hands. But no, all we get is a woman who is scorned and who goes after her husband's lover in a very violent and cartoonish Latina way. Um, I think that the whole Christianity, like the very deeply held Christianity part, is more realistic in this, because like there's a lot of very strong um uh Christianity that gets spouted in a lot of Latina households, even though the man constantly goes out and cheats. I actually had somebody that I worked with who we all went out to lunch, and he's like, "Oh, I have to pay with cash so that it doesn't go in my credit card because my wife will flip out and she'll think that I'm cheating on her." We're like, "Oh, that's really weird. Why would?" Oh, it's because I've done it before. And when he oh god, what was it? And then the whole way back from lunch, he's defending himself, like, "Oh, well, in the Bible it says that men can go out and like sow their seed and whatever." And I'm like, sir, I went to Catholic school for 16 years. You really want to debate the Bible with me? But anyway, that's just to point out that hypocrisy in Latinos, where it's like, "Oh, well, we can do whatever we want." And although Rico beats himself up for it and only sleeps with her after Vanessa kicks him out, it's still a hypocrisy, and it's still he had an emotional affair, which is every bit as valid as a sexual affair. But in a show where there's so much infidelity by everybody
Yes.
in the main
True.
cast,
Yes.
Rico's, yeah, like everybody's cheating on everybody. Like, what's the problem here? But Rico's is the one that gets cast as the most offensive one. Like
That's
his
true.
is the biggest um moral rupture. And it's again, I think it's just poor writing by white people. Like, that's what it comes down to for my mind. My favorite DS is the little boys because they're adorable.
They are adorable.
They are. But I mean, really, it's Vanessa, because I really think she has so much um, resilience. I think she's a very resilient woman. I think she was absolutely right when they separate, to want to take the time to explore herself as a single woman, because this is in contrast to Ruth, because Ruth wasn't, she has never really been a single woman. Like, as soon as Nathaniel dies, she starts dating Hiram, and then she starts dating this other dude. So she never gives herself time to just breathe.
Mhm.
Even, whatever, we'll get to that later. But Vanessa is like, okay, no, I'm going to just, take my, and yeah, she dates this other guy who is played by Adam Rodriguez, it's like a baby Adam Rodriguez with a baby Adam Rodriguez face. It's so funny.
Yeah.
Like, when I see him and he's young, and I'm like, oh my gosh, you look like a toddler. Um,
It's true.
um, but it doesn't feel like she's jumping into another relationship just for the sake of it, just because she needs a man. It feels like she's genuinely exploring her options, and then they don't get back together until they've managed to work things out as a family. Um, but they really wrote Rico in a way that I can't stand him. I hated him, and it makes me sad, because it's not. I think it's just a failure of the writing. I'd love to have seen what a better writer could do with this character, but the acting was fantastic by both Freddie
Oh, yeah.
Rodriguez and Justina Machado. I think that they're amazing.
Yeah. No, yeah, once again, all the performance, and it is so funny when you watch this back and you're like, "Oh my gosh, I forgot this actor had a guest part in this actor, and look how young they are." Like, there's young Chris Pine in an episode. There's
Yes, I seriously had to do a double take, and I had to IMDb, because I was like, this can't be right. This looks
I
so
just
much like Chris Pine.
tweeted a picture. I was like, "Oh yeah, I forgot Chris Pine was in this," and there's Wade Wilson and, all this stuff.
Yeah, like
Like
half the
all these
cast of The Office was in it.
Yeah, Jenna Fisher
Jenna
dated
Fisher was in it.
Rico, dated
Uh
Rico
huh.
for a little bit, yeah, yeah. When he does that whole inappropriate thing of, like, going when she's blowing him off, it's not he just can't accept that that's what's happening, and then he goes and has them break into her apart open
Just like,
the
could you
apartment.
not take the hint?
Like, dude. Yeah, but I agree. I think the writing for Rico is poor for the Diaz family in general. I think the writing is subpar. They don't get the same good writing that the other characters do. And there's so much that they could do that's missing, and if they would have delved deeper into it. And I think if they would have had better writers on the staff, or more diverse staff of writers. I mean, I should have researched the makeup of all of the writers behind the scenes, but you needed to have more of that in order to write this better. And, like with the whole with Vanessa's story, and Vanessa's my favorite, too, but with Vanessa's whole storyline, when she is dealing with her mental health, it would have been so great if they would have explored that better, because that would have been such a great contrast to Billy, because the way they could have done it with her would have been, maybe to show that, hey, everybody, not everybody that is dealing with mental health struggles is going to be like Billy. They're actually going to deal with it. And, and I thought it was good to explore that in the scene where she's, oh my gosh, I was like, no, do not take that medication. You haven't been prescribed it. I don't care that you're it's a nurse that's doing this. Don't do that. You're gonna hurt yourself. And watching her, when they go and they do the salsa lessons, and she goes and she like passes out, or she has that, because she is taking too many drugs. She's combining all these drugs together. When she
Yeah.
listed the drugs she's taking, I was like, oh, I'm so glad you survived. But if they'd explored that more from her angle and not just from Rico's, like you said, it was all about him. Anything that happened to her was about him. And that was so frustrating, because she was such an interesting character. And to be able to explore her, when she was without Rico, and watching her have a life outside of
Mhm.
him and explore who she was. And if we could have seen more of that and seen her maybe explore new avenues of a new career, or new things she wanted to do, or, something like that, exploring who she was outside of being a mother and a wife, that would have been so nice to see. But once again, the writing wasn't there, and she was just there as, this is Rico's wife, and we're going to put her through some trauma for Rico, not for her. And so that we can have Rico cheat and
Mhm.
all that stuff. And that was just really annoying. And when I know when the show was airing, everybody would be like, no, they never write good for Rico, so we don't even care about his storyline. And that's what was so sad, because it wasn't interesting. It could have been so much more interesting, especially when you've got two phenomenal actors, and
Yes.
you would have just explored them, especially if you wrote a character specifically for this actor too. It's like, when I read that, I'm like, oh, really?
I
Because
well, because my thought when you said that was like, did this person not like him? Like, is that why they give him this? Look, I think that you are a great actor, but I also hate you. So I'm writing this terrible role for you that is going to be written super poorly.
yeah, yeah, it's like, okay. And yes, the family, the Fishers, treat him like garbage. Oh my gosh. And I mean, just really like trash.
He's a
And
third class citizen.
oh yeah, and I am not a fan of Rico. I actually do not like Rico, but I hate the way he is treated by the Fishers. It's abhorrent. It's horrible. And but I did love when you got to see the flashbacks of Rico with Nathaniel, when he first
Yes.
meets Nathaniel, and how you can tell that that's why Rico became, started it working in the funeral business, because of Nathaniel Sr. And so I really, really loved those scenes. And it was a different side of Nathaniel than we had seen previously. And I really liked that a lot. And the care, and that Nathaniel showed, and the fact that that's what attracted Rico to do this work. And you could tell that he had a lot of respect for Nathaniel, and I really, really appreciated that. But yeah, and he was super homophobic. But yes, I do think there was racism there on David's part, definitely, and on Nate's part too.
Yes.
Yeah, and Nate's part too. I mean, and then of course the whole scene where um, it's in season 5 when Rico calls Nate out on his racism, and Nate's like, "You just called me a racist before," and blah, blah, and
Right.
I'm
I don't
like,
want to be called a
"Oh,
racist again.
such a
Ha ha
little
ha.
white
Yeah.
boy."
Well,
That
but
was
I
so
think it's
frustrating.
also so interesting that the most that we see of flashbacks of Nathaniel being a father figure are with Rico.
Yes, very
That is the
true.
only because
Mhm.
he treats him. And here's the thing: I think if he had been a white character, the writers would have written him very differently, and I think that he would have been like a third son of Fisher and Sons. I think it wouldn't have been like, oh well, you can't be a partner because this is family only, and this is Fisher and Sons. It would have been a more natural thing of like, well, my father considered you like one of his own, and they could have dealt with Rico differently, I think. But I think that they were just stubbornly clinging to this idea of othering him
Yeah.
because he's not white. And I don't know, and I don't think it was even a conscious thing. I think that's just what racism is. I think it's so insidious that you're not even noticing it as you do it.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, and you know, but it was interesting watching him when he would try to deal with people, which, like you said, he cannot deal with people. But one of the most interesting times with that was when they had the guy who shot up his workplace and then killed himself. And then they had the family of the shooter come in there, and they were going to handle that one. And they were also at the same time also handling the funeral for one of his victims. And Rico was just going to automatically say, well, we're sorry for your loss, but we're not going to help you. And David being like, no, we are going to help you. And Rico struggling with that. And I want to say, I totally understand why you would struggle with that, especially with the fact that at the same time you're handling one of the victims' funeral. So I understand why Rico got upset with that, because sometimes it would be Rico was upset because a lot of it did have to do with his faith, or it had to deal with, sometimes homophobia. But in this instance, you know, it made sense, because yes, there is a moral conflict there, especially if you are handling the same funeral of one of the victims. I do think that was definitely a case where Rico was in the right there in a lot of respects, because, or at least it should be something to be explored more, because that was kind of a really kind of iffy situation morally.
Right. But I
But
did
I don't
like
know how
that
but it's a
David,
business too, so
but I did like, and I think that it was very David to have this line of thinking that the funeral is for the living. It's for
yes,
the
true.
people who are left behind. And his parents are not responsible for this guy's actions. So like that to me made a lot of sense. And it just,
That
oh, that's a whole different discussion.
Well, yeah, yeah, that's true.
Like,
That's true.
oh.
Yes, yes, that was one of the I forgot all about that first opening death. That was one of the hardest
Mhm.
openings ever on the show. But yeah, he was just there was just so much wasted potential there, and he ended up being such a one of my least favorite characters on the show, and it was sad to me because there was so much you could have done there. And and I wish they had explored Vanessa more and given her more, where she was not just all about being Rico's wife, because she was
Yeah.
such an interesting, and like I said, you could have had such a great counterpoint there with the mental health stuff. And that was such a meaty storyline to give her, and to give her some more to do and explore her, but instead they wasted that potential there. And that was the most frustrating part about that storyline there.
Yeah, and
Yeah,
it's a show that is so good at handling parallels, at
yeah,
and at making things contrast in a way that's why I said that it was like a book, but it's like one of those books that has so much depth into it that you could just sit there and really study it for decades, and they really dropped the ball on this
yes,
because the parallel
yes.
was right there.
Yeah, yeah, and I mean, they could have explored more, like, I loved when you did see her talking with that family when Rico's like, "I'm here all alone, I need someone to help
Hmm.
me," and she comes in and she's so kind and caring, and just it's, instantly something that she takes to, and so you get the feeling that she will be doing that and helping with the business going forward. And so I did appreciate that, but they could have explored that more. That could have been something early on, and
Yeah,
she could
because
come
she was
into
a
the business.
nurse. Yeah, I mean, like, she was a nurse. She was apparently really good at what she did. They could have, oh god, just a whole boatload
Lots of
of missed
wasted.
potential, and it makes me so angry.
Yeah, lots of wasted potential there for sure.
Mhm.
Yep. Yep, definitely. Definitely wasted. I did when I thought it was funny that when Rico became like like the other funeral director lady that worked for a brief time for the Fishers, and then she meets Rico at that funeral
Yes,
conference, and
Angela.
she's like,
Oh.
"Oh, I just love you." She's like
Oh
meeting
my
her
gosh.
idol, like she's like, "You're so sexy."
Yes, that actor when I saw her name in the cast in the very beginning of the
Yeah,
episode, I was like, "Oh my god," because I got so excited because anytime that I see her, she plays something kind of offbeat like
she
this.
does. Yeah,
And I was like, "I
very
can't wait, I
underdone.
can't wait."
Yeah, yeah, she's really yeah, she's and I just loved that he had like a groupie.
I know, right?
And Rico, of course, is like, "Oh, this is amazing."
And of course, Rico being Rico, like they have a
I
one night
know.
stand, and he's like, "So, are we, can we have a relationship now?" And she's like, I have a relationship. Thank you for asking, though."
But I thought that was so funny. It's like and they're so excited to go to that one and
Yes.
I'm like, "Okay,
And they get so excited
whatever."
about Funyuns too. Oh, I
And
absolutely love that
Fritos
she's throwing.
too.
Yes, that she's throwing them into the bed, and he wakes up being hit by them. He's like, "What are you doing?" And she's like, "It's breakfast in bed."
And then he eats the Frito. I thought that was really funny that he ate it and he wasn't like, "Oh, whatever." He's like, "Oh, yeah, my groupie." Yeah, I thought that was funny. Um, okay, well, actually, I'm gonna switch 2 items on here because, I mean, we're already going really lengthy here, and I do wanna talk about this episode. So I
Please, yes.
do wanna talk about, episode 5 in season 4 that's called "That's My Dog." This is definitely if you are a 6 Feet Under fan, you know how divisive this episode is. This really is an episode that some people love this episode. There are tons of articles out there. I highly recommend Googling research. I may just in the show notes include some links to some articles with different takes on this. Some articles where people hate this episode, some articles where people love this episode. Um, so yeah, this is a very divisive to this day. I saw and I didn't share this with Carla because I was worried someone would spoil stuff in there, but there is a Reddit thread about this where someone discovered it and went, "Oh, this is one of the best episodes I've ever seen of television." Then there's a response saying, "Really? I think this is one of the worst episodes of television I've ever seen." So it's a very divisive one. And I'm going to give trigger warnings here because trigger warnings for assault, for forced drug use, for kidnapping, for torture, really torture, emotional torture, physical torture, trauma. So this is an episode that really threw everybody when this first aired, this was like, whoa. um, so it starts out as a normal 6 Feet Under episode. You've got the opening death, you've got, multiple storylines, and David is he's picking up a body. He sees somebody, Jake, who is on the side of the road with what he thinks is his broken down car. And Jake is all nice and sweet and cute and everything. And David, being the kind and caring person he is, picks up Jake and is going to take Jake to get some money at an ATM. One ATM is down. They're driving around. They're bonding. They're having this time. David is fantasizing about them hooking up. And then they finally found an ATM and they're walking in, and David is ahead of Jake. And Jake says, "Hey." And David looks around and Jake punches him. And from that moment on, the whole story is focused on this and the hijacking. And they go to find crack and he forces David to use it. And he ends up pouring gasoline on David. And David thinks he's going to die. And then he just leaves. So, and "That's My Dog" title comes from they're going down an alley and he says, "That's my dog from years ago," and makes David go chase down the dog. And he's like, "No, that's not my dog." And it's just another form of torture. And this plays a part in David's whole story from this moment forward. So I want to know, Carla, are you on the love it or the hate it side of this storyline?
I love this episode. I think it's brilliant. I think it's absolutely brilliant. And this is why. I think that for a character who has been as repressed as David, and you want him to have a transition to more open vulnerability and to kind of fraying at the edges a bit. How do you do that? Well, this is a really great way to do it. And it's awful that it takes all of this trauma, but at the same time, it it does it in one fell swoop where it's brilliant because it's so shocking. and it's happening to the best person on the show, the person who is in many ways the most innocent on the show.
Mhm.
Um, and you know, like multiple headlines, or rather multiple articles about this episode say that David gets kidnapped, and you get kidnapped too as the audience, and you absolutely do. But I think it's also very necessary in this episode, and I think that the reason that it feels so odd and it might feel so off-putting to many people is that it's a very uncomfortable departure from the form of the show. I think a lot of people may not like it because it's not about Nate, and again, the show is very Nate centered.
Mhm.
So, and it's not a dig at people who love Nate. It's not a dig at Nate himself as a character, or even the show for centering Nate so much. It's simply an observation that suddenly we're focused on the other Fisher brother going through something huge in his life, something from which he's not going to recover quickly or easily, something that's going to stay with him for the remainder of the show. Um, and something that also brings about change in a positive way for him with his relationship with Keith, um, and that forces him to come to terms with a lot of things about himself. But first, he has to get through this moment, and it's a very prolonged ordeal that he deals with. I mean, it's not like he tells his family later that, oh, he got carjacked and roughed up, and that was it. Because again, he's trying to protect them. He's a protector. He is providing comfort to his family by denying them the ability to comfort him. He needs the
Mhm.
comfort, but he won't give it to himself because he feels like he doesn't deserve it. And in this episode, he's being continuously denied things that he deserves, like liberty and life, and his pride is also very hurt, um, because of the way that he conducts himself in his business, and he's forced to abandon a body by the side of the road by this person, which is, I think, one of the more traumatic parts of it for him, because he very much prides himself on giving people a dignified burial and treatment after their death. So him having to leave that woman's body was very hard for him. And it's all done at gunpoint. I mean, he's sitting there trying desperately to call 911, um, you know, on the phone because this happened. And there are many times, like, you know, if you're watching this, you're like, oh, he could have escaped then. Why didn't he do this? But it's just like reading the news and hearing that somebody went through something and it's like, I would have done this and this. I wouldn't have let this person do this to me. It's never um something that you would let somebody do to you until you're in the moment, and you feel like you don't have options. You feel like you don't have a way out other than to just kind of be docile and hope for the best. Um, so it makes, I think his actions make a lot of sense for David. I don't think that there's anything out of character in this at all. I think every single thing that he does is very much the way that David would react and did react. Um, but because he feels like he doesn't deserve um, to be given, he doesn't have an expectation of respect, I think, for himself. He expects respect for his for what he does. He thinks, I'm a very good funeral director, I deserve respect for that. But he doesn't feel like he deserves respect as a human being. Um, when he picks up Jake, I I I think in a way it's because he has gotten pretty good at, picking up random people for random sex. And as part of his agreement with Keith and everything's fine, he sees this guy, he's like, oh, he's cute, maybe I'll just pick him up, maybe we'll have a bluey, whatever. But he's not taking into consideration the risk in it, because he's like the more innocent one of the family.
Mhm.
I think Claire, because she's a woman especially, would never have picked up some rando on the side of the road. That's just part of being a woman. I think Nate may not have, because he's so selfish and he wouldn't have cared. They were
Unless it was a hot woman. It was
useless,
a hot
yeah, right? But David, yes, this guy is stranded. Let's help him. Also, he's cute. So, um, but I did feel that it was. I think that the episode was necessary. I think that um, the being trapped with David is narratively necessary uh, because it's so jarring and it forces you into a state of panic like David because you're like, when am I going to be free from this? In every other episode, you have relief from tense moments. You have a moment where they break
Mhm.
away to somebody else and something else happens. And it's like, okay, so you can brace yourself for going back to this tense moment. But here, there's no release, none at all until the very last moment. And David is absolutely sure that he's going to die. He's absolutely sure. I think as somebody watching it, you might also be absolutely sure that he's going to die. Um, so it's honestly a big relief when he doesn't, but it's also a kind of a surprise because you think that this guy's gonna at least shoot him or something. You don't really expect him to just walk away, to just take the van and leave. You don't expect David to be able to walk home. Um, all of that is a surprise, and yes, it's a good surprise because you don't want David to die, but it's uh, he is narrowly avoiding death. You're narrowly avoiding living through his death in such a very violent way, and um, I think also when we talk about the things that minorities get put through in television, he's a minority because he's gay. So there's a little bit of that concern of like, is because he's the gay character, then and he has this measure of violence in his otherwise soft life. You had that episode of that guy who was with his boyfriend, and he was killed by homophobes. Um, so there, like that's what I was kind of what was rolling through my mind as I'm watching it. But I think, and Jake does call him the F word a couple of times, F slur a couple of times. So you do wonder if there's an element of that. Um, but it's the way that David deals with Jake is an example of the way um, that he's trying to he tries reasoning him with him. He tries relating to him. When that doesn't work, he tries pleading. Um, And all of that I think is very much David, because David would try to talk somebody down gently and would try to think, okay, how can I show this person that I too am a human being who deserves some thought of my well-being. Um, and when and there are moments when he thinks that this might happen because Jake keeps telling him, this one more thing, and then I'm going to let you go. This one more thing, and then I'm going to let you go. So
Mhm.
every time that relief is near, again, he gets pushed down into this nightmare. And I think that that's a lot of what his life is. It's just constantly having responsibility and hardship dumped on him, seeing kind of like, okay, well, I might when Nathaniel dies, he's like, okay, well, maybe we can just sell this place and I can go back to law school. And then Nate decides to stay and he decides to keep it open. So he's going back under. It's just so much of just David's story wrapped up into one really awful day. And um, I think that the aftermath is harder to process than the moment itself as a viewer, because it's hard to watch him constantly see this person in his mind and try to get closure by going to visit him. The guy doesn't even remember him, which is like so hard to watch. This guy who has been taking up so much of David's mind be like, I don't know who you are. Like, what are you even talking about? Um, uh, but I think we also needed this for David to grow up. It's not pretty. It's very different and therefore very hard, very scary for people to be like, oh, I can get behind this very different narrative style of the show that I'm used to being this one way. But I thought it was absolutely brilliant. I wouldn't have wanted it done any other way. I don't know, like I just keep thinking about it, and it's just amazing storytelling. Absolutely. You forget about what happens to the other characters in that episode because you're just so caught up in this moment. And then, as a side note, I was telling Aaron earlier that, is this his tryout for Dexter? Because, like, there's so much stuff going on that might have happened in Dexter. And also, if it
True.
was Dexter would not have let this happen. Absolutely not. Like you kind of want to watch him Dexter out and be like, not today. Like maybe take him back to some room with like tarps everywhere. That's kind of like, but it doesn't happen because there's no relief because this is David, and it's oh my god, I can't. I'm done. Whew. Back to you, Erin.
Well, I first want to say I think one of the best articles I've found about this episode, it's probably one of my favorite, is on disobedientsounds.com by Laura Stort, and it's titled 6 Feet Under, David and We Get Hijacked, and That's My Dog. And the author writes in here about all these articles about it always say David is the best character on this show. I have some of these people are like, I don't even like this season very much, but I love David. And I think that's part of the reason people, and I could be wrong, I don't want to speak for people, but I even have conflicting emotions sometimes about this episode. And I think it's all because we don't want to see David have to deal with this. It's very hard to watch a character you love so much be terrorized like this and tortured like this because oh my gosh, up to the very end it's unrelenting. It does not stop, and being forced to use drugs and then being forced to try and decide how you're going to die, and then having gasoline dumped on you, which is such, on top of just being torture, it's almost humiliating in a way. And David is such this sensitive soul who helps so many people, and he's being, in his mind, punished for helping somebody. And I know a lot of the articles said, well, this doesn't make sense. David would never pick up this person. I think, like you said, Carla, it makes complete and total sense. This is David. This isn't, somebody else. David would do this. And yes, David is all about getting, treating the body with respect, but I don't think he feels like he's disrespecting the body. It's just kind of like he's just sidestepping and doing this. And and then I even read someone say, it was in a comment thing, so it wasn't in an article, say, oh, well, David shouldn't have left the body there. That was so awful for him to do. I'm like, what the hell? He's like he's been kidnapped. He's not flipping.
Yes.
It's not his fault that the body's being left
He
there.
didn't open the back. He didn't pull the body out, and he was at gunpoint when he's
I
being forced
know.
to abandon the body. What did you want him to do? Like get shot?
I know. I'm like, seriously, people. It's like kind of victim blaming in a way. A lot of the stuff that you see when people say, "Oh, well, David had all these opportunities."
Mhm.
You don't know how you're going to react in a situation like that until you're in there. You might even not even be like David, and you might be someone that always thinks you're going to be, you're going to choose those moments to run. But it's the same thing, like, people, blaming women who stay in abusive relationships. Why didn't you just leave? Well, there's a different psychology going there. He's scared. He thinks he's going to die. This whole time, he thinks, this is when I'm dying. I am going to die. And the moment when he is in the alley and he's had the gasoline poured on him and the gun, and he's closing his eyes and he's doing that flashing on his family and Keith and everything. And it's like, he really thinks he's going to die. And watching him sitting there for a while afterwards when he hears the van leaving, and then when he's walking down the street and then a cop comes, but just the way Michael C. Hall is so brilliant in this episode, by the way, too. He's
Yes.
so incredible. And in that scene where he just is walking and defeated, and then he sees the cop, and it's like this moment of like, yes, he's going to be rescued, but it's going to take a long time for him to be actually rescued, and the trauma that inflicts on him. And I do want to say one thing I've always been grateful for is they did not make him a drug addict after this. They didn't play
Thank
this
you.
trope of like, well, now he's going to be struggling with addiction. I'm so
I was
glad.
worried about that. And I
Yeah.
was so relieved that they didn't go that way.
Yeah, because they easily could have, and I'm glad they didn't. And I know one of the other big struggles that people have with this episode, and this one I totally can understand, and that's where some of the conflicting emotions go, is to choose the gay character in the show to do this to. I understand why some people have issues with that. If they had killed him, that would have been
Forget it.
that
Forget
I
it.
probably would have quit watching this show, because I remember when this episode aired and sitting there after it was over, and just like the article that I put out, she said she literally threw up, and I can
Mhm.
understand that. And I remember just sitting there like mouth jaw open, like, I can't believe they just did this in the show. I can't believe they just did this to David. But they did have him survive. It is important to note, I think if this had been written not by gay men, and it is written by gay men, and it was directed by a gay man, I think if they hadn't had that, I think probably they would have killed David, honestly, because I think it was important. That's where it comes in, that it's important to have certain people in a writer's room and certain people directing, and I think that's why it didn't go that way. But yeah, I mean, I have conflicting emotions solely because I hate watching David go through this and everything after it, but I do think it is a brilliantly done episode that really sticks with you. And I stupidly decided to watch this episode right before I was going to bed, and I'm like,
Oh
why
no.
did you know what episode was coming next, Erin? You knew what was coming. And I had totally forgotten there were other storylines that happened before. I was like, I thought the whole thing was just about this, but that's how impactful it is, because you forget all the other stuff because you're just with David. And then watching David deal with the aftermath of that, and then it continued into season 5, and then it was reopened when Nate died, was just such an interesting thing to watch. And I also want to point out, and I'm actually kind of selfishly glad that I'm the one who gets to point this scene out, and Carla didn't. I'm surprised she didn't. I love that Nate, sorry. Oh God, I don't know why I said that David hasn't told anybody the full story, but he tells Claire, and he has the scene where he tells Claire about the gasoline, and he tells the whole thing. And like you said, a long time ago, almost 2 hours ago, when we were talking about the Fishers, and you said David and Claire's relationship is so much different, and there is this sense, there's this more sensitivity, vulnerability, this caring there. And I love that scene so much, and I love that he opens up to Claire about that, and Claire just listens, and you can see she's just so heartbroken for her brother. And I loved that he opened up, and that he told her, and that he told someone in his family, that, because yes, David doesn't want to tell anyone. I'm assuming Keith knows everything because he tells Keith everything. I'm hoping Keith knew everything. I'm
Yeah,
assuming
yeah.
Keith did. So, because I mean, of all the people, like we said, Keith knows David better than anybody else. So yeah. But yeah, and Michael C. Hall was just, and I can't remember if he won the Emmy during season 4 or when he did, but he's just so incredible in that episode. It's just, oh. So I wanted to make sure we talked about that one, because I thought it was an important episode to talk
It
about.
absolutely
So.
is. I would have been so bummed if you had bumped that section.
I know, because I did say if we have time, but then when
I
I
know.
rewatched
Like,
it,
I
I was
can't
like,
believe you would put me through that trauma and not talk about it, Erin.
I know,
Carl,
but
you
then
have to watch this episode. Oh, what for?
I know, because I did. I specifically told Carla, I said, you have to make sure when you're watching this, you have to watch this episode. And I knew
I
which
noticed that,
episode.
that you didn't tell me not to watch it before bed.
I should have done that. But, yeah. Okay, well, I want to know really quickly here, and then we'll move to the finale. But man, so Carla, would you have a favorite opening death?
I do. There were so many. so many good ones, so many interesting ones. But the one that really stuck with me the most was James Dubois Marshall in Coming and Going. That's the name of the episode. He he is impeccably dressed. Like his cuffs are perfectly lined up. He has this gorgeous suit on. He goes and parks at Fisher and Diaz, and he turns off the car. He puts
Mhm.
on this beautiful hat, takes an envelope, puts it on the dash, and leans back and dies. And it's like the most beautiful death, like, and it's also in a way like the most considerate death. It's like, oh, he took himself there.
That's true.
He
It
drove
saves you the
himself there.
time.
He saved people the transport costs and trouble. But it's such a peaceful way to die. Can you imagine, having such awareness of your body that you're like, this is it. I'm
Oh,
going to spare my family the grief of having to, find a suit for me and have this and that and have to find the body. I'm going to take care of this because I'm taking care of my family. And that was just so beautiful. It was so beautiful. Oh my God.
yeah, yeah, and his family was even like, "Yep, this is what he
That's
was."
just what dad would do.
Yeah, that's what he would do, and we knew that's what he was going to do. And yes, it was very, very considerate.
It was so, like, okay, everybody should be that thoughtful.
Yeah, and it was peaceful, and it was,
Yes.
yeah, yeah. Well, mine is is on a more of a funnier side. So, and it's season 1, episode 10, the new person, and it's just when the husband's killed with the frying pan by the wife.
Oh my God, yes. It's so funny because you think that he's going to like choke on his food or
Yes,
something or whatever, and it's like, nope.
and I just
Well, of
love
course
that.
I killed him. He was so boring.
Yes, I know. I love that. That's why, and then I love that she does it, and then she just sits down and eats.
Yes, that part was amazing. She's making this gorgeous plate of scrambled eggs and bacon, and you think that it's for him because he's sitting at the table, all like manly, like, oh, I'm gonna tell my woman about my day, and it's like, nope, it's for me.
I loved that. I thought that was so funny. So I decided I'd point out one of the lighter ones. I was like, I'm gonna go with the lighter one. Just, I mean, I know it's murder, whatever, but it was still
Right, but
funny.
it's still funny. Well, and it also reminds me of Beth Grant's episode
Oh yeah,
when she thanks his angels for their sex dolls.
Yep, that was a runner up for me. Yes, because it's so funny with the sex. She's like, oh, it's the rapture.
Take me now, Jesus.
Oh, such a perfect Beth Grant role too.
Yes.
Yeah, that was funny. That was really funny. Um, okay, well, at only 3 hours, we're at, we're at the series finale part. It's hey, I'm fine with that with this one because this is, like I said, one of my favorite shows. I knew it would be long. Can you imagine if we had all the panels that were supposed to be on it into
Oh my gosh.
I would have cut this outline down. Um, so Carla, this is I first want to say this is I want to give the IMDb rating because this is one of the most beloved series finales ever. Some people call it the best series finale ever. It is got a rating on IMDb of 9.9.
Nice.
And then critics, I don't know if they give a critics rating on here. But I know critics rave about it too. So this is thought it was one of the best series finales ever. So Carla, did you like the way this show ended?
I thought it was wonderful. I absolutely loved it. I kind of feel like maybe Supernatural tried to rip off the ending with Claire driving the car, and then there's Dean driving the car as you see his brother aging with that horrible wig and then eventually dying.
The blurry
And
way.
the blurry wife, yes. With a scare wig. Oh God, it's hilarious. But like it really feels like they were trying to channel that. Having watched this now, it feels like that. But I
Yeah.
really I loved that they gave us closure. And in life we often don't get closure with anything, let alone with somebody's death. When somebody dies, no matter how prepared you think you are for it, it's more often than not it's traumatic and it's hard to deal with. I don't care how old somebody is. Oh, they live such a good life. I don't care. That's still somebody who was special to me.
Yeah.
Um, and so these characters become so special to us. So it really is wonderful that they don't just leave us hanging, because they could have very well ended the episode at Claire's goodbye party, because it's a beautiful moment where everybody's there, the whole family is there, including all of the children, all of the grandchildren, and there's so much joy and togetherness. Like, that's the moment that Ruth had been hoping for all along, is to have her whole family there laughing and happy. And they have those beautiful toasts to Nate. And I think it's a wonderful send off. If they had cut it off there, it would have been perfectly wonderful. But then they went a step further. Um, and Claire, as it turns out, she doesn't get that to do that job in New York that she had, that she was, for which she was leaving. But again, in her mind, there's Nate telling her, go anyway, you'll find something, you're talented, you can do this. But it's really her. Again, anytime that people show up, it's these people talking to themselves. And finally, she's come to the point where she's telling herself good things about herself, where she's not seeking validation from all of these horrible men in her life. Um, because that's what she's been doing with these broken men. It's not just the caretaking and the wanting to fix them, it's also seeking a validation from somebody, because she's the youngest daughter. She came in super late, and her father was never really a father for her. Her oldest brother took off while she was tiny, and all she had was David, and he did his best, but it's still her brother. So the validation that she was so desperate for is finally coming from, the call is coming from inside the house. Um, but also, it's an episode where everybody gets closure in their lives before we get closure as an audience. And you see Brenda having that moment with Nathaniel Sr. and with Nate, where Nate hands her the baby, and so she can stop worrying every moment of every second that she's going to lose her baby. You have David confront this hooded man, and finally realizes that he's been fighting himself. He's been scared of himself, and that is such an important moment for him. You have Ruth seeing that Nate's going to be okay in the afterlife. He's all right, and all of it gets told as Claire is driving off in her little Prius, which is such a cute little blue car. And you also have that moment where Darrell calls Keith dad, which is, it just melted me, because they've it's back to being Fisher and Sons, with David being the Fisher and Anthony and Darrell being the Sons. And you have that moment when Darrell's watching David,
Yeah.
just like David watched his father. And all of these great scenes of their lives being lived, and being lived with joy. Um, Ruth gets to be an old woman, and she has George by her side. And George has become like a really great supportive force in her life. He's there for a lot of their other events. Most of these people pass peacefully. We've discussed Keith, which still makes me very, very angry. Again, this is racism in writing. But it's just as Nate's death being where it was, I think it feels like it was placed there specifically so that we can start these characters in their next journey, so that we have time to grieve him and let go. Now that we've grieved him, now these characters can move forward. He has pinned all of them under his mess and his need for so long, and now that he's gone, yes, they've scattered, but in a way that's healthy for them and that helps them all grow and become the people that they need to be. So this it didn't feel like a very sad thing where, they're never going to see each other again, they're never going to be under the same roof again, because you see them coming together over and over and over again. David dies at like a family picnic which I think was the best way for David to go, just around people that who love him, because that's one thing that he said. All he wants is to be loved, and he gets to have that in the moment of his death. Claire gets to marry Christmasina. Who doesn't want that?
True. She marries the best Chris.
She marries the best Chris after he has come back from Republican conversion camp.
He's got the gray in his hair.
Yes, which he wears so well.
Yes.
But they all get to live their lives fully and, for the most part, joyously. And it's with that one exception, it's the best send off. Oh, and even Rico gets to just die of natural causes on a cruise ship. You know.
Yeah. The cruise ship, yes. Yeah. Yeah, and also to have the final moments with the song "Breathe Me" by Sia, which I had forgotten about that song, and then I was like, oh yeah, and I just instantly went and added it back into my Spotify because I love the music in this show too. I want to say, it kind of reminds me of in Magnolia when they all are singing the Amy Mann song together, and it kind of reminds me of that in a way. Again, showing music's power, and I do like that you get to see their whole arc and their their futures and what happens to a lot of them and how they die. And once again, the Keith death was not okay, but all the other deaths were great. And it's interesting that actually, I think you couldn't have had a finale of this show without showing the characters dying in this kind of show, because the show's all about death. And I really liked most of the other deaths. I thought they were really interesting. And I thought Brenda's death was funny in a way because
Yes!
she's sitting there with her brothers just rattling on about some philosophical thing. And it's almost like she's like, I'm just sick of hearing this. I'm just going to die. That was funny. Like, that's it.
Like, peace out, bro. I'm done.
It was totally like that. I laughed.
And see, this is why I think those two girls were like, I'm done with this Chenoweth people, because it's like they were in a home together. They were in like a nursing home together, and the girls were nowhere to be found. It's like, we're done here.
And then Brenda's like, I'm done too.
Oh God, Billy's still going on. Bye-bye.
I know. Billy was still Billy. And that's it. I can't do it anymore. That was so funny.
It was hilarious.
It's like, okay, I'm done listening to your stories. Yeah, I thought that was really funny. And I, of course, I like that Claire ended up with Christmasina's character, after he's seen the light and he's no longer a Republican. I do. I like your headcanon there, and I am going with it. So that I can really, really root for that relationship. And I did love when David when David dies and he is surrounded by all the people he loves, and then he sees Keith. Young Keith, and Keith catching the football and smiles at him, and it's like, oh, okay, he's going to go join Keith now.
Like he's being called home.
Yeah, that was really beautiful. I really loved that. I thought that was really, and I loved seeing their wedding. I wish we could have got more of that wedding.
Okay, this is how you know that the show is centered around Nate, because Nate gets to have not one but two weddings on the show, and David doesn't even get to have a full wedding.
That's true. We deserved to see that wedding and hear their vows. I wanted to hear their vows.
Yes.
Yes, I wanted to hear those. Yeah. And I really loved before Claire leaves and you have that family dinner. And I loved the story David told about Nate and Nate's hair, and then seeing a spider weapon, his hair, his cool 80s hair. I thought it was so funny, and it was such a sweet story. And I just loved the way that was told. And I loved seeing, the kids there at the table, and when Brenda and Ruth are joking, and Ruth is like, yeah, and I caught you in that compromising position with my son. and then Darrell being like, I want to hear what you're talking about. And then Bettina's like, yeah, I do too. I thought that was great.
Well, and I love that Ruth was finally able to make peace with Brenda
Yes, yes,
because not because I like Brenda, but because I think Brenda really needs Ruth,
yes. Oh my gosh, yes.
and Ruth needs to her grandkids too.
Yes, and I think that's the only way they could have moved forward is to
Mm.
because they wouldn't have that bad of relationship, and so yeah, and Ruth loves being a grandmother, and so
Mm.
she needed to have that. And I love that you got to see that Darrell and Anthony were finally seeming comfortable and they weren't on edge and thinking they were going to lose this. And I liked that Darrell was like, "Yeah, I'm going to be a firefighter," which
Oh,
was what led to him saying because my dad was a cop and all of that. And I liked watching the scene where David's showing Darrell how they do what they do, and that was great too. And you even get to see, I. I I wish you could have seen a little bit more of like all the grandkids growing up a little bit, but you didn't have time for that. I understand that isn't something that I'm like pissed about. That would have been a wish, but it is overall, with the exception of a couple of things, it is basically a perfect finale. And a lot of finales, not just Supernatural, but a lot of finales have tried to emulate this finale since then. Some have done it well, like I think Parks and Rec did, and then some haven't done it well, like Supernatural and The Blurry Wife.
and the bad wig. Let's not forget the
Yes,
bad.
the bad wig. Oh my god. Oh, oh, yes. Anyway, one of the worst finales. So,
Yeah.
yes. And I'm glad that Michael C. Hall, according to us who are correct about the New Blood finale. I know a lot of people hate it, but whatever. I'm glad that Michael C. Hall now doesn't have to have that shame of having the best and worst. Now he doesn't have to live in shame. That's probably one of the reasons he wanted to do the Dexter way. He's like, I'm sick of this.
Yeah.
So yes. So okay. Well, I'm just gonna quickly do the 6 degrees of Finn because this is so damn easy. And I will just do it with Kathy Bates. Kathy Bates was in Hotel with Finn, and I love Kathy Bates' character in American Horror Story Hotel. I was trying to find this clip to share with Carla, and I'm going to still try and find it of when Kathy Bates' character, who is such a lonely, sad character, and she she discovers Instagram or something. She gets an Instagram account and she makes this video with the cats that is like the most hilarious thing in the world. And she's good friends with Liz Taylor, who's the best character that's ever existed in American Horror Story. But anyway, that's for another time. But yeah, I think that I have to find that clip and show it to you because of Kathy Bates. But anyway, thank you so much, Carla, for joining me for our longest episode we have ever done.
Kind of hard to believe, but I guess
except for the bonus American Horror Story episodes. But this is the longest episode we have ever done.
Thank you, Erin, for talking about this show, getting me interested in it 2 weeks ago, and being like, "There's still room if you want to join." And me being like, "Okay, I guess I'll just binge it."
I know. Thank you. This is
ending up being the only panelist.
yes, because we were supposed to have Aaron A was supposed to be on and Meg was supposed to be on, and sadly, both of them had other things that ended up coming up. So I'm very grateful that Carla signed up too, because then I got to talk about one of my all-time favorite shows. This was a
For
ton
over
of
3 hours.
I know, for a short time. I'm going to be kicking myself when I'm editing this, but it's just the two of us, so it's a lot easier when it's just two people. Anyway, even though it's long, I may do the cheating and speed up the audio. Confession to our viewers that view this later.
You still cut up a whole 10 minutes there.
Yeah. But anyway, we're going to go ahead and close out. And Carla, tell all of our listeners where they can find you and your podcast that is back. Bedwed or Behead is back.
Yes, Bedwed or Behead is back with new episodes. We took a brief vacation / COVID break, but we are back. You can find us wherever you find wonderful, beautiful podcasts by wonderful, beautiful people. You can also find us on Twitter at BedWetBeheadPod, on Instagram at bed.wet.behead.pod, on Blue social media that may or may not be spying on your family and giving them misinformation every third click. Just look for Bedwet or Behead Podcast. You can also find me and my musings and my photography I'm not as good as Claire, but like I also
No,
don't
she
have a
is
trust
as good
fund.
as Claire. She
Oh,
is good.
thank you. Thank you. I appreciate that. I would also take her trust fund, but nothing.
Yeah.
And at on Instagram and on Twitter at Carlatemis, or my website carlatemis.com. That's CARLATEMIS.com.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And this is Erin. You can follow me on Twitter at eAprilBeauty. The E and the A and the B are capitalized. Be sure to like the show on Facebook at facebook.com/It's a Fandom Thing Pod. On Twitter at Fandom Thing Pod. No, it's on that one. On Instagram at It's a Fandom Thing Pod. On TikTok at It's a Fandom Thing Pod. If you have any feedback, show notes, if you'd like to be a potential guest on the show, any of the actors in this show, especially you, Michael C. Hall. I've been begging you to come on the show for a while now.
Yes, please just make her day already.
It'll be a very respectful interview.
Totally.
Yes. And then also I want you to just sing too at some point. If you're okay with that. And you can also say yes, mistress, at any point. just for shits and giggles. I know you're taken. I know you have a girlfriend. I just if you could just, I'm
Just
a big fan.
an actor about it. It's like not a big deal.
Be in character. You'll be
Yes.
play a character. Okay, anyway.
Jim, it's fine.
Yeah, exactly. Um, but you can do that by going to our website. It's a fandomthingpod.com, clicking the contact us button there, and that'll shoot me an email, and we'll look at scheduling an interview. And while you're on our website, you can do a couple of cool things there. We have launched our signups for our second annual horror trivia event. So click on either on the front page, you'll see second annual horror trivia event signups, or you can go to the actual page on the website that's called Second Annual Horror Trivia. Then is a link there to a Google form to fill out. There's also a Google Doc that goes over some of the general rules and information that are subject to change. We are asking for a $5 donation. If you become a Patreon subscriber before you sign up, that's waived. But all that money will be going to organizations. It's not going to me. So all that money is going to a good cause. It will be split between one Black Lives Matter organization, one Stop Asian Hate organization. Of the grand prize winner's choice, we will make sure they are good organizations, though, and that they're not. There are some that are not. So we are going to make sure if we see it's not, I'll probably just say, can we try a different one? This is not a very good, reputable one, because there are some that aren't. So I want to stress that as well. And then also, while you're over there, you can play the listener version of 6 Degrees of Finn Whitrock. This month we are playing with, except for one show, all of these are ones that Carla has been on of episodes when we covered them. But we are playing with BoJack Horseman, Promising Young Woman, Superstore, and Scare Me. So go to the page titled 6 Degrees of Finn Whitrock. Tell us how Finn is connected to those shows and movies in 6 degrees or less for a chance to win some merch. And on our next episode, our decidedly shorter episode, it's already been recorded. It's just me and Sasha. So it's another one with just me and one other person. We talked about a show that was brand new to me, Lock and Key. And you will hear a funny story about how I thought this was a show that was very like kid thing or like Harry Potter-esque. It is not. And I should have known because it was co-created by Joe Hill, who is the son of Stephen King. So it's very dark and twisty. Yeah, I know. Sasha laughed at me tremendously. I realized in the first 2 minutes it wasn't like that, but so I liked the show, and you'll hear me rave about some of the actors there too. So that's our next episode. So until next time, remember, it's a fandom thing. Black Lives Matter and Stop Asian Hate. And to anyone who tunes into this later, I know I saw people jump in and out, but anyone who tunes in later, thank you so much for sticking with this long one. I think it was a great conversation, though. I'm only saying that.
So worthwhile. And I'm not just saying because I was on it. Oh, that's part of the deal.
That's mainly why. That's mainly why. Yes. And hopefully when listeners or viewers watch next, I will be talking about hopefully a movie that will terrify the hell out of me, because I'm going to a movie tomorrow to go see I can't even remember what it's called now, but it's supposed to be absolutely terrifying. Some people have said there's life before I saw this movie and life after I saw this movie.
Whoa.
And people are saying, if you're a horror fan, you have to see this movie. So it's called Barbarian. So I am going to go see this, and I'm glad I'm seeing it because I get spoiled for everything now, and so then I won't be spoiled. So anyway, sorry, I don't know why I'm telling everybody this. It's because I'm a little punchy. So viewers are gonna be like,
Drunk on me.
who gives a crap? But anyway, so bye, good night. I will play our other cheesy promo since I messed up on our ones that we were filming before. So anyway, night. Whoops.